Leap beneath the bustling streets of a modern metropolis in a bank that had stood for generations. Workers made a discovery that would send shockwaves through the world of history. A vault, sealed and forgotten for over a century, was found entirely intact. Its door, heavy with rust and time, hadn't been opened since the final years of the 19th century. Inside wasn't just gold or jewels, but something far more explosive. Stacks of leather-bound ledgers, private correspondence tied with faded silk ribbons, and portfolios of photographs, all meticulously preserved in the cool, dry air. This wasn't merely an abandoned safe. It was a time capsule from the Gilded Age, holding secrets so profound they threatened to unravel the official stories of Europe's most powerful aristocratic families. The contents of this vault promised to rewrite everything we thought we knew about that opulent, turbulent era. Imagine a world of unimaginable wealth and rigid social hierarchies, where the daughters of American industrial titans crossed the Atlantic, their steamer trunks filled with fortunes, to marry into impoverished but titled European nobility. This was the Gilded Age, a period of glittering balls, sprawling mansions, and public virtue. But behind the gilded facade lay a different reality, one of clandestine deals, whispered scandals, and desperate efforts to maintain a way of life that was rapidly fading. For decades, our understanding of this complex exchange of money for status has been shaped by public records, sanitized memoirs, and society page gossip. But what if those were just the surface, a carefully managed performance for the world? The truth, it turns out, was locked away, waiting in the darkness of that vault, a silent witness to the real transactions that shaped dynasties. This video is your key to that vault. We are about to embark on a journey into the very heart of these aristocratic secrets, pulling back the velvet curtain on the lives of the heiresses who became pawns and princesses, and the noblemen who traded their ancient names for new money. We will uncover the hidden clauses in marriage contracts, the secret accounts used to fund rebellions and silence blackmailers, and the personal heartbreaks buried beneath layers of public spectacle. This is more than just history. It is a human drama of ambition, survival, and the relentless pursuit of legacy. The story that was meant to stay hidden is finally coming to light, and it changes everything. The institution that housed this remarkable secret was the venerable Fifth Avenue National Bank in New York City, a bastion of old money finance that had served the city's elite since the 1870s. For generations, its imposing limestone facade had been a silent partner to the fortunes of the Astors, the Vanderbilts, and the Rockefellers. The discovery itself was not the result of a treasure hunt or a historian's hunch, but of pure, mundane corporate evolution. In the late 1990s, during a complex merger with a larger financial conglomerate, a full audit and consolidation of all physical assets was ordered. A team of junior accountants and facility managers was tasked with the unglamorous job of cataloging every single safe deposit box and storage vault across the bank's numerous branches. It was in the sub-basement of the original flagship building, a level thought to be used only for old filing cabinets and obsolete ledgers, that they found it. Tucked behind a false wall that had been constructed during renovations in the 1950s was a heavy, circular door made of reinforced steel. a design completely unlike the modern rectangular boxes elsewhere in the bank. The vault's lock was a complex mechanism untouched for decades, and the logbooks contained no modern entry for it, its very existence wiped from institutional memory. When the specialist team finally managed to coax the massive door open, the atmosphere that greeted them was thick with the weight of a century. The air was cool and still, carrying the unmistakable scent of aged leather, brittle paper, and the faint metallic tang of rust. A fine layer of dust, undisturbed for generations, coated every surface, puffing up in little clouds with every cautious step. The only light came from the work lamps they brought with them, casting long, dramatic shadows that danced across stacks of ledgers bound in calfskin and piles of document boxes tied with cords that crumbled at a touch. It was a scene of perfect preservation, a moment frozen in amber. There was no gold bullion, no stacks of cash, no glittering jewels. Instead, the true treasure was information row upon row of private financial records and personal correspondence that documented the clandestine financial lives of the transatlantic elite. The quiet hum of the modern city above ground felt a world away from this silent, sepulchral chamber holding its breath for 100 years. These secrets remained hidden for so long not just because of a forgotten door, but because of a powerful, almost sacred code of silence. The true guardian of the vault was not its steel door, but the unbreakable oath of secrecy sworn by the bankers who managed it. In the Gilded Age, a gentleman's banker was more than a financier. He was a confessor, a strategist, and a keeper of shadows. Men like the partners at Fifth Avenue National were pillars of discretion in a world built on reputation. Their profession demanded an ethical code that extended far beyond modern concepts of privacy, a vow of silence that was understood to be binding not just for a lifetime, but for eternity. While we have laws today about data protection, this was an era where a man's word and his honor were the ultimate currency. A banker's oath was his bond, a solemn promise that the most sensitive details of a client's life would never, under any circumstances, leave the sanctum of his office or the pages of his private ledger. This profound confidentiality was born from necessity. The financial lives of the transatlantic elite were incredibly complex and often precarious. An American heiress's dowry might be used to secretly prop up a British duke's failing estates, or a German prince's gambling debts could be quietly settled from an account held under a false name in New York. A single rumor of financial instability could shatter a family's credit, ruin a promising marital alliance, or lead to social exile. The banker was the linchpin in this delicate ecosystem. He knew which nobleman was merely leasing the jewels his wife wore to the opera, and which industrialist's fortune was secretly collateralized against a risky railroad venture. He was the only one who saw the complete, unvarnished financial picture, making his discretion as valuable as the money he managed. A breach of that trust would have been a catastrophic professional and social sin, ending a career instantly and irrevocably. Consider the immense pressure these men faced. They were privy to affairs of the heart as much as affairs of state. They held the power to destroy dynasties with a single careless word. This is why the most trusted bankers cultivated an aura of impenetrable silence. They communicated in coded telegrams, used numbered accounts long before the concept became associated with Swiss banks, and kept their most sensitive records in a separate, private system, a system that, as we now know, was physically sealed away in that hidden vault. The ledgers found there weren't just accounting books, they were narratives. Next to a transaction for $50,000, a banker might have penned a brief, cryptic note. For the Alpine matter, or per agreement with the Countess, to be settled upon the youngest son's majority. These annotations were the keys to understanding the true stories, written in a language only the initiated could decipher. The death of a client did not absolve the banker of his duty. In fact, it often deepened it. The secrets of the dead could be even more dangerous, with the potential to disrupt inheritances, ignite family feuds, or reveal illegitimate children who had a legal claim to a fortune. The banker's oath was a chain linking generations, a promise that the sins and stratagems of the father would not be casually unearthed to haunt the son. This created a unique historical paradox. While these men were meticulous record keepers, they were also, in effect, master obscurers. They created a perfect, enduring secret by writing it down and then vowing to never speak of it again. The hidden vault at Fifth Avenue National was the ultimate expression of this philosophy. It wasn't a time capsule created by accident, but by design, a permanent, silent repository for truths too volatile for the light of day, guarded by the ghost of an oath that finally, after more than a century, has released its grip. And so, the first line of defense for these secrets was not the vault's steel door, but the elegant deception practiced within the bank's own ledgers. Before a single dollar or pound was deposited or withdrawn, a client's identity was often stripped away and replaced with a simple, unassuming number. This system of numbered accounts and carefully chosen pseudonyms was the foundational layer of secrecy, a masterclass in obscuring ownership that allowed the elite to move their fortunes through the global financial system without leaving a public paper trail. Imagine walking into that grand, marble-lined banking hall. You would state your name to the teller, but the moment your business moved to a private office, your identity transformed. The vast fortune you were depositing for your daughter's dowry would not be listed under the famous surname splashed across the society pages. Instead, it would be logged into a special, confidential ledger under account number 734, or perhaps under the poetic, yet entirely fictional, name Mr. Peregrine. This was standard practice for the most sensitive transactions, creating a ghost economy that ran parallel to the official one. The purpose of this anonymity was multifaceted and, for the aristocracy, absolutely essential. For an American heiress, a numbered account could protect her fortune from unscrupulous suitors or distant relatives who might see her new wealth as their own personal treasury. Her dowry could be securely held in New York, with disbursements carefully managed by the bank according to a pre-arranged schedule, all without her future husband or his family gaining direct control over the principal. For the European nobleman, these accounts were a lifeline. He could discreetly sell off family heirlooms, a Rembrandt painting, a set of Gobelin tapestries, through the bank as an intermediary, and the proceeds would be deposited into his anonymous account. This allowed him to generate crucial cash flow without the social humiliation of his peers discovering his financial distress. The public facade of unshakable wealth and land ownership could be maintained, while behind the scenes, the numbered account quietly funded the repairs to a crumbling castle roof, or paid the exorbitant costs of a season in London. The mechanics of this system were both simple and ingenious. A bank like Fifth Avenue National maintained two parallel sets of records. The first was the standard official ledger, which recorded routine transactions for the vast majority of clients. The second was the confidential ledger, kept under lock and key and accessible only to the most senior partners. This confidential ledger was the true map of the bank's shadow world. In it, a client's real name would be listed once, often in code itself, and then cross-referenced with their assigned number or pseudonym. All subsequent activity, deposits, transfers, investments was recorded under that number. A transaction instruction might come in via a coded telegram reading simply, transfer 50,000 from 734 to account Helvetia, and the bankers would know exactly what to do without any names ever being written down. This system provided what we would now call plausible deniability. Even if a ledger were somehow discovered by an outsider, it would be a meaningless jumble of numbers and cryptic aliases. Some of these pseudonyms were wonderfully creative and revealing of the client's personality or circumstances. While many chose bland, forgettable names like Smith or Jones, others selected monikers that hinted at their aspirations or heritage. A French countess, forced to liquidate assets after the Franco-Prussian War, might operate under the name Madame Lafayette, a nod to both her nationality and a revolutionary hero. A British lord with a passion for sailing could use the Mariner Trust. These weren't just random aliases. They were tiny fragments of identity, carefully curated masks that allowed a sliver of the person to show through while the whole remained hidden. The bankers, in their role as confidants, often helped devise these names, ensuring they were both memorable to the client and unremarkable to anyone else. This practice transformed dry financial accounting into a kind of literary exercise, where fortunes were managed under the guise of fictional characters, each with their own secret story waiting to be told by the discovery of that hidden vault. And so we come to the first and perhaps most personally devastating secret locked within the vault: the meticulously documented existence of an illegitimate heir. Among the stacks of ledgers, one file in particular stands out, bound in distinctive blue leather. It contains a complete, heartbreaking narrative of a forbidden romance between a prominent British duke and the daughter of an American railroad magnate. Their affair, conducted during the Duke's grand tour of the United States in the late 1880s, resulted in a child, a son whose very life was a threat to the established order. The documents within this file reveal the entire clandestine operation to manage this crisis, a stunning example of how bloodlines and fortunes were protected at all costs, even from themselves. The core of the secret lies in the trust fund agreements. These were not simple bank transfers. They were complex legal instruments designed to provide for the child while absolutely guaranteeing his anonymity. The Duke, leveraging his connections, worked with lawyers in both London and New York to establish a blind trust. Massive sums of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, a king's ransom at the time, were funneled from the Duke's numbered account into this new trust. The beneficiary was listed only as the ward of Mr. Edward Sterling, a name that appears throughout the file as the appointed guardian. The income from this trust paid for the boy's elite education at a boarding school in Switzerland his medical care, and eventually, a generous annual allowance that would support him comfortably for life. Yet, crucially, the principle of the trust was legally structured so that he could never access it directly or use it as leverage to make a claim against the Duke's legitimate estate. It was wealth with an invisible cage, providing a life of privilege, but forever barring the door to his true heritage. Communication about the boy was handled with the precision of a spy network, revealed through a series of coded letters between the Duke's personal solicitor and the child's guardian. They never used names, instead referring to the Duke as the architect, the heiress as the lady from Philadelphia, and the boy himself as the young protege. A typical update might read, "The architect is pleased to hear the young protege continues to excel in his botanical studies. Please ensure the necessary funds for his summer expedition are made available through the usual channels." These letters, tied with a faded ribbon, chronicle every stage of the boy's life, from his first steps to his graduation. They are filled with a strange, detached affection. The Duke was clearly invested in his son's well-being, yet the entire relationship was mediated through layers of lawyers and code. A father observing his child's life from 1,000 miles away through a veil of absolute secrecy. The most shocking documents, however, detail the legal maneuvers taken to permanently seal the boy's fate. As the Duke grew older and the inheritance of his legitimate title and estates loomed, the risk of a scandalous claim intensified. The file contains draft copies of a new secret will and a legally binding covenant, signed by the Duke and the heiress. In this covenant, the mother agreed to never reveal the boy's paternity to him or anyone else, in exchange for a separate, substantial payment into her own account. The secret will included a clause that specifically disinherited any unknown or unacknowledged offspring, not formally recognized by the House of Lords, a preemptive strike against any future legal challenge. The bankers were the silent executors of this harsh bargain, tasked with ensuring the trust payments continued smoothly, but also with protecting the primary inheritance for the Duke's official family back in England. They became the gatekeepers of a truth that was meant to die with everyone involved. The human cost of this elaborate secrecy is palpable in the one uncoded letter found in the file, a single page from the American heiress to the Duke, written on the eve of her own society marriage to a suitable, if unexciting, New York banker. Her handwriting is hurried, emotionally charged. She pleads for just one meeting, one chance for their son to know his father before she is bound to a new life and a new name. There is no record of a reply. This lone, heartfelt document sits in stark contrast to the cold, legalistic language of the trusts and covenants. It is a raw reminder that behind the account numbers and pseudonyms were real people, living with impossible choices, their deepest relationships and heartbreaks reduced to entries in a confidential ledger, their love child transformed into a permanent, well-provided for secret, his true identity the ultimate price paid to preserve a gilded dynasty. While the story of the secret heir reveals the personal costs of protecting a bloodline, the vault held another, equally explosive file that demonstrates just how far aristocratic families would go to secure a crown itself. This second secret centers on a European prince, a man who stood directly in the line of succession to a significant throne, in his brief, intensely passionate marriage to a woman deemed utterly unsuitable by the standards of his time. The entire heartbreaking episode was systematically erased from history, its legal and emotional wreckage carefully sealed away in that New York vault, far from the prying eyes of European courts and gossiping tabloids. The prince in question was a minor royal from a German principality, a young cavalry officer known for his charm and restless spirit. Sent on a diplomatic mission to the United States, he was introduced to the vibrant social scene of Newport, Rhode Island, during its glittering summer season. It was there, at one of the infamous balls held in the cottages of the new American elite, that he met the daughter of a self-made steel magnate. She was not nobility, but she possessed something many European aristocrats desperately lacked: a vast, fluid, and entirely new fortune. More importantly, she was witty, beautiful, and utterly captivating. The prince, accustomed to the rigid formalities of his own court, was swept away by her vitality and the sheer freedom she represented. Their courtship was a whirlwind of clandestine carriage rides and stolen moments, a genuine love story blossoming in the shadow of immense social pressure. The discovery of their secret marriage, performed in a small, quiet ceremony by a justice of the peace in upstate New York, sent shock waves through the prince's family. A marriage to a commoner, and an American one at that, was not just a scandal, it was a political catastrophe. Under the stern laws of his house, such a union would mean the immediate and irrevocable loss of his rights of succession. He would be stripped of his titles, his military commissions, and his state allowances, becoming a royal in name only, forever excluded from the dynasty he was born to serve. The throne he was being groomed to potentially inherit could not be sullied by what his family's advisors coldly termed morganatic blood. The response from Europe was swift, brutal, and meticulously organized. The file in the vault contains the original, hastily drafted annulment decree, a stunning document that lays bare the legal machinery used to dismantle a marriage. The grounds for the annulment were flimsy at best, a legally creative fiction alleging a procedural technicality in the marriage license application. More tellingly, the decree includes sworn affidavits from members of the prince's retinue, who testified under oath that the prince had been temporarily deranged by a fever at the time of the ceremony, calling his mental capacity into question. It was a character assassination conducted through legal paperwork, all designed to create a paper trail that would allow the church and the state to declare the marriage legally void, as if it had never happened. The entire process was orchestrated by the prince's own family, who worked with their bankers in New York to funnel substantial payments to the lawyers and officials involved, ensuring the matter was settled with maximum speed and minimum publicity. But the cold legalese of the annulment papers tells only half the story. Tucked beside them is a bundle of letters, their paper fragile and the ink now faded to a soft brown. These are the private correspondence between the prince and his now former wife in the weeks following their forced separation. His letters are filled with a desperate, agonized love. He pleads with her to understand the unbearable pressure he is under, the weight of centuries of tradition and family duty that is crushing their future. He writes of his powerlessness against the combined might of his family and the government, confessing that his choice is between her in his very identity. In one particularly poignant passage, he laments, "They have not just broken our union, they are demanding I unlove you, to tear the memory of you from my soul as if it were a sin." This is a feat beyond any man's strength. Her replies reveal a different kind of heartbreak, one mixed with a sharp, clear-eyed fury. She expresses her love for him, but she also articulates a profound sense of betrayal, not just by him, but by the entire system he represents. In one devastating letter, she writes, "You speak of your duty to a crown, but what of your duty to the vows we made to each other? They have purchased your freedom from me, and in doing so, have shown me that my fortune, for all its size, is worthless against the currency of a name." She saw with painful clarity that her new money, which had initially made her so attractive and intriguing, was ultimately the very thing that made her unacceptable. She was too rich to be ignored, but her wealth could not buy the one thing she truly wanted: legitimacy in the eyes of a world that would always see her as an outsider. The final document in the file is the financial settlement, a transaction that speaks volumes about the price of silence. The prince's family, through their bankers, established a monumental trust fund for the young woman. It was an amount so vast it guaranteed her a life of unparalleled luxury, but it came with ironclad conditions. She was required to sign a contract vowing to never speak publicly about the prince, the marriage, or the annulment. She was to return all his letters, a demand she seemingly circumvented by hiding these copies away in the vault for safekeeping. Most cruelly, she was compelled to leave the continent entirely, to build a new life far from the society circles where their paths might ever cross again. The bankers, ever the discreet facilitators, managed this entire transaction, ensuring the money was transferred and the signed confidentiality agreement was securely filed away. The prince went on to make a politically approved marriage to a princess of suitable bloodline a few years later. His brief, passionate rebellion against his destiny neatly and permanently erased, leaving only a file of heartbreaking documents in a vault an ocean away as testament to what was lost. The third secret to emerge from the vault shifts our focus from matters of the heart to the cold, hard calculus of geopolitical power. This file, bound in stark black leather, contains irrefutable evidence of a political bribe on a staggering scale, a transaction that reveals how the vast fortunes of American industrialists were weaponized to shape international affairs from the shadows. At its center is a titan of industry, a man whose name was synonymous with American ingenuity and progress, and a high-ranking minister in a European empire, a man whose public persona was one of uncompromising integrity and national service. The documents meticulously detail how a multi-million-dollar sum was transferred from the industrialist's numbered account to a shell corporation controlled by the minister, a payment artfully disguised as a legitimate foreign investment in a railway project that was never intended to be profitable for anyone but the minister himself. The mechanics of this deception were a masterpiece of financial engineering, laid bare in the confidential ledgers. The industrialist, whom we'll refer to as Mr. Ironworks, based on the coded annotations, first moved the enormous sum equivalent to over $50 million today from his main holdings into his anonymous numbered account at Fifth Avenue National. From there, the money was transferred not directly to the minister, but to a newly formed corporate entity registered in a jurisdiction known for its secrecy laws. This company, with the bland and forgettable name, the Continental Transport and Development Corporation, existed only on paper. Its stated purpose was to provide capital for a new railway line in the minister's home country, a project that had been languishing for lack of funding. On the surface, it appeared to be a straightforward, if risky, international infrastructure investment. The public records, had anyone been able to trace the money, would have shown a legitimate business transaction. But the private records in the vault tell the true story. Alongside the transaction entries, the bankers had notated the real purpose. One ledger entry simply states, "For the Balkan concession, per agreement with the patron." Another document, a memorandum of understanding written on the minister's official letterhead but never signed, outlines the quid pro quo. In exchange for the investment in the railway corporation, the minister's government would award Mr. Ironworks an exclusive, no-bid contract to supply all the steel and rolling stock for the nation's entire military railway expansion program, a contract worth 20 times the initial bribe. Furthermore, the minister agreed to use his considerable influence to lobby against protective tariffs that were being considered by his parliament, tariffs that would have made Mr. Ironworks' steel prohibitively expensive in that market. The bribe wasn't just for a single contract. It was a strategic move to dismantle trade barriers and lock in a monopoly, all funded by the very corporation created to hide the payment. The human intermediaries in this scheme were as fascinating as the financial ones. The vault's file includes detailed invoices from a consulting firm that acted as the go-between. This firm, run by a suave, multilingual expatriate with connections in every European capital, was paid an exorbitant fee to facilitate the introductions and manage the complex web of transfers. His role was to be the plausible deniability, the layer of insulation between the principled American industrialist and the corrupt foreign official. He would host dinners at private clubs, arrange chance meetings at hunting lodges, and convey messages in a language of winks and nods, ensuring that nothing was ever explicitly stated in a way that could be documented. His invoices, paid from the same numbered account, list his services as market analysis and business development, but the timing and amounts correlate perfectly with the key moments in the negotiation, painting a clear picture of his true function. The consequences of this clandestine deal were profound and far-reaching, extending beyond corporate ledgers and into the realm of global politics. The military railway that Mr. Ironworks' company supplied was a critical logistical asset for the minister's empire, which was, at that very time, preparing for a regional conflict. The swift mobilization of troops and supplies along those rails arguably tipped the balance in a short but decisive war, altering the geopolitical map of the region. The industrialist, meanwhile, saw his company's value soar, his personal fortune multiplying and solidifying his dynasty's place among the American elite. The minister used his illicit wealth to consolidate his own political power, funding a network of patronage that kept him in office for decades. A single corrupt transaction, hidden in a New York vault, had indirectly fueled military aggression and redefined the economic destiny of two continents, all while the public on both sides of the Atlantic remained entirely unaware of the true forces at play. This secret file forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about the Gilded Age. The grand philanthropic gestures, the libraries, the museums, the universities, that burnished the reputations of these industrial titans were often funded by fortunes amassed through methods that could not bear public scrutiny. The same man who endowed a world-class institute of technology might also be the one secretly bribing a foreign minister to crush competition and secure monopolistic contracts. The banker's vault, in preserving this unvarnished evidence, reveals the stark dichotomy of the era: a public face of virtuous capitalism and civic duty, and a private reality of ruthless, amoral deal-making. The code of silence that protected secret heirs and annulled royal marriages also shielded these monumental acts of corruption, allowing history to remember the benefactor while the hidden ledger held the truth of the schemer. But the world of high finance and political intrigue was not the only stage for these clandestine operations. Sometimes the secrets were far more personal and glittering, hidden not in complex corporate structures, but in the cold, brilliant fire of precious stones. The fourth and perhaps most audacious secret concealed within the vault's steel walls involves a legendary, unsolved jewel theft and the shocking truth behind it. The file, marked with the simple label, "The Countess," contains a collection of documents and photographs that irrefutably link a cash-strapped European countess to the famous disappearance of her own diamond parure, a masterpiece of jewelry that vanished from her suite at a Newport mansion during the summer season of 1893. For over a century, the crime was a mystery, attributed to a phantom cat burglar. The truth, however, was that the Countess herself was the mastermind of an elaborate insurance fraud, and the meticulous records of her deception were stored for safekeeping with her most trusted financial confidants. The Countess, a celebrated beauty known for her impeccable taste and seemingly boundless wealth, was in reality teetering on the brink of financial ruin. Her husband, the Count, had squandered the remains of his ancestral fortune on failed business ventures in a notoriously expensive racing stable. The file opens with a series of increasingly desperate letters from the Countess to her banker, pleading for extensions on loans and advances against future income. In one, she writes with startling frankness, "The creditors are like vultures circling a carcass. If we cannot make the payment on the Shadow's mortgage by the end of the quarter, we shall be not merely embarrassed, but utterly exposed." The glittering social world she commanded was a house of cards, and the pressure to maintain the facade was immense. It was in this atmosphere of panic that a desperate and cunning plan was born. The centerpiece of the scheme was her most valuable asset, a breathtaking diamond necklace, earrings, and tiara set, a family heirloom insured with Lloyd's of London for a sum that could have cleared all of the Count's debts twice over. According to the police report, which is also included in the file, the jewels were stolen from a locked drawer in her dressing table during a crowded ball. The Countess professed to be utterly distraught, and the investigation, hampered by the sheer number of guests and servants, eventually went cold. The insurance payout, however, was swift, providing the Countess with a massive, tax-free infusion of cash that instantly resolved her financial crisis. For over 100 years, the case remained a tantalizing cold case, a story of a thief who vanished into the night. The vault's contents, however, reveal a far more sinister and calculated narrative. The most damning evidence comes in the form of a series of pawn tickets and secret sale records, carefully hidden amongst the Countess's more conventional bond certificates. These small, crumpled slips of paper tell a story of gradual, clandestine liquidation. The tickets, from pawnbrokers in Boston and Philadelphia, cities far from her usual social orbit, document the pawning of individual diamonds, carefully pried from their settings. One ticket, dated just 2 weeks after the reported theft, is for a single brilliant cut diamond, approximately 4 carats, a perfect match for one of the smaller stones from the missing earrings. The bankers, acting on her instructions, would send a discreet intermediary to these shops to pawn the stones, providing immediate cash without any connection back to the Countess. The pawn tickets were then stored in her file, almost as receipts for services rendered. But pawning was only the first step. The file also contains photographed copies of the stolen purrier, alongside detailed gemological notes in the Countess's own hand. These notes record the specific clarity, color, and carat weight of each major stone, effectively creating a secret inventory. Then, there are the records of the final sales. Through a network of contacts in the diamond trade in Antwerp, the larger, more recognizable stones were sold off over a period of several years. The records are cryptic, listing buyers only by initials and amounts in Belgian francs, but the running tally in the margin of one ledger page shows a total sum realized that nearly matched the original insurance payout. She had, in effect, been paid twice for the same jewels, once by the insurance company for their loss, and again by the underground diamond market for their actual sale. The brilliance of the scheme lay in its patience and the Countess's understanding of human nature. She never attempted to sell the complete set, which would have been instantly recognizable. Instead, she broke her own inheritance into anonymous, untraceable components, scattering its beauty to the winds in exchange for financial survival. The bankers facilitated this not by actively participating in the fraud, but by providing the ultimate safe deposit box for its evidence. They held the pawn tickets and sale records, ensuring they would never be found in a search of her homes, and they managed the complex international transfers of the funds from the sales, laundering the illicit proceeds through her numbered account and mingling them with her legitimate income. In their ledgers, the money from the sale of a stolen heirloom diamond was just another deposit, its criminal origins hidden behind a veil of professional discretion. The Countess got away with it, living out her days in comfort, her reputation for elegance untarnished, while the truth of her deception lay quietly in the dark, waiting for a future generation to uncover the glittering lie at the heart of her salvation. The fifth, and perhaps most chilling secret to be pulled from the vault's depths, moves us from crimes of passion and finance into the shadowy world of international espionage. This file, unassuming in its plain manila folder, contains a devastatingly simple set of records, a series of monthly payment vouchers from the diplomatic mission of a European neutral power, made out to one of New York's most celebrated and influential society hostesses. For decades, historians had whispered about the possibility that her legendary salon's gatherings that brought together politicians, industrialists, and military officers with the city's cultural elite were more than just social events. These vouchers, stamped and signed by the embassy's financial attaché, confirm the darkest of those rumors. They are the literal paper trail proving that for the entirety of a major European war, Her home was a sophisticated intelligence gathering operation, and she was a highly paid agent of a foreign power. The hostess in question was a figure of immense charm and social power, a woman known for her sharp wit, her impeccable connections, and her ability to make anyone in her drawing room feel like the most important person in the world. She was not a classic beauty, but she possessed a magnetic charisma that drew people to her. Her husband, a wealthy but politically disinterested shipping magnate, provided the fortune that funded her extravagant lifestyle, leaving her free to cultivate her circle. Her guest lists were the envy of every other hostess in the city, regularly including senators, high-ranking Army and Navy officers, and the presidents of the very banks and corporations that were fueling the Allied war effort. In the glittering, relaxed atmosphere of her parties, surrounded by fine art and excellent champagne, the powerful let their guard down. They debated strategy, complained about production bottlenecks, and shared anxieties about the war's progress, all under the attentive and seemingly sympathetic ear of their hostess. The neutral embassy that funded her was perfectly positioned for such an operation. Its diplomats had access to all sides of the conflict, and their country's official neutrality provided a perfect cover for intelligence activities. The payments recorded in the bank's ledger as consulting fees were anything but. Each voucher corresponds to a specific month between late 1914 and early 1918, and the amounts increased significantly after key Allied military offensives, suggesting her information was directly influencing the value her handlers placed on her. The bank's role was, as always, one of seamless facilitation. The embassy would deposit a lump sum into its own account, and the bankers would then, upon presentation of the voucher, transfer the specified monthly payment directly into the hostess's numbered account. This created a clean, deniable financial channel that left no direct link between the embassy's main funds and its star asset. Her methods of information retrieval were a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She never carried a notepad or asked blunt, direct questions. Instead, she was a virtuoso of conversational steering. She would share a seemingly innocent piece of gossip she'd overheard, prompting a guest to correct her with the true, classified information. She would express sympathy for a general's logistical nightmares, encouraging him to elaborate on specific supply shortages. She perfected the art of the flattering, leading question, making her guests feel brilliant and insightful as they inadvertently divulged state secrets. One anecdote from the file, recounted in a rare memo from her handler, describes how she learned of the exact shipping date for a massive convoy carrying American troops. She merely lamented to a naval captain that she had to cancel a large garden party for that same date due to a forecast of bad weather. The captain, seeking to comfort her, bragged that the weather would be perfectly clear offshore, as he was personally overseeing the departure of the entire fleet that very morning. The intelligence she gathered had real and devastating consequences. While the documents in the vault don't detail every piece of information she passed, the timing of certain payments aligns ominously with historical events. A particularly large payment followed soon after a major Allied shipping convoy was mysteriously intercepted and sunk by enemy submarines in an area thought to be safe. Another spike in her compensation occurred just after detailed plans for a new type of armored tank were leaked, forcing a costly and time-consuming redesign. Her salons were not harmless social gatherings. They were a leak in the very heart of the American war machine, and the information that flowed so freely over her teacups and canapes undoubtedly cost lives on the battlefields of Europe. She was trading the lives of soldiers for the continued funding of her extravagant lifestyle and the thrill of being at the center of a dangerous game. The ultimate betrayal, however, is revealed in her personal correspondence, also carefully preserved in the file. In letters to a confidante, letters she likely assumed would never see the light of day, she displays a breathtaking cynicism about the entire affair. She refers to her powerful guests as pompous fools and gullible peacocks, mocking their arrogance and their eagerness to impress her. There is no ideological commitment to the cause of the power she served. Her motives were purely financial and egotistical. She reveled in the secret knowledge that she was the smartest person in the room, manipulating men who believed they were manipulating the world. The war, for her, was not a tragic global conflict, but a backdrop for her own personal drama of deception and control. The vault's cold, hard financial records, when combined with her own glib words, paint a portrait of a profound moral emptiness, a woman who used her social gifts not to build bridges, but to burn them, all from the comfortable confines of her gilded drawing room. The sixth and final secret from the vault reveals a weapon far more potent than money or title, the weapon of information. This file, labeled ominously as the leverage portfolio, belonged not to a victim, but to a predator. It was the personal collection of a famously sharp-tongued American heiress who, after being snubbed by the highest echelons of society, decided to forge her own path to influence not through charm, but through coercion. Within this dossier, we find a chillingly organized system of blackmail, a carefully curated arsenal of compromising photographs, stolen love letters, and confidential financial statements that she used to systematically silence her rivals and bend powerful figures to her will, exposing the brutal, unsentimental underbelly of the social climb. Her story begins with a public humiliation. She was the only daughter of a Chicago meatpacking baron, her family's wealth so new it practically smelled of the stockyards. Upon her debut, she arrived in Newport with a fortune large enough to buy most of the cottages on Bellevue Avenue. But she was met with closed doors and condescending smiles from the old money matriarchs who still controlled access to the most exclusive circles. They deemed her and her family unrefined, their money too tainted by its gritty origins. One society queen was famously overheard saying, "One cannot buy pedigree, no matter how many cattle one has slaughtered." This rejection, instead of crushing her, ignited a cold, calculating fury. She realized that the world of polite society was a fraud, a brittle facade of manners hiding a core of vice and vulnerability. If they would not let her in through the front door, she would force her way in through the back, using their own secrets as her key. Her method was one of patient, predatory accumulation. She cultivated a network of informants that would be the envy of any intelligence agency. She paid hefty retainers to private secretaries, ladies' maids, and even telegraph operators, who would provide her with copies of sensitive correspondence. She hired photographers with new, discreet portable cameras to capture indiscreet moments. A married duke leaving a known actress's apartment in the early hours, a teetotaling senator stumbling drunk from a private club. Her most ingenious source, however, was a corrupt clerk within the very bank that housed her vault. For a regular fee, this clerk provided her with confidential transaction summaries, revealing which noblemen were secretly mortgaging their estates and which wives were receiving unexplained payments from male friends. She didn't just collect dirt. She collected a complete, interconnected map of the entire elite's financial and moral failings. The dossier itself is a masterpiece of organization, a testament to her analytical mind. It is divided into sections by family name, with each entry containing a summary of the compromising information, an assessment of the subject's current social and financial standing, and a clear notation of what she wanted from them. For a prominent Wall Street financier who had spread the rumor that her father was illiterate, the file contained evidence of his insider trading. The desired outcome was noted simply: public apology and a seat on the board of his railroad. For the Duchess, who had pointedly excluded her from a charity ball, the file held letters proving the Duchess's own secret affair with a much younger Italian tenor. The goal: a formal written invitation to her annual summer gala and a donation of $10,000 to my chosen charity. She wasn't just seeking revenge. She was engaging in a form of social engineering, trading secrets for status and power with the precision of a commodities broker. The consequences of her campaign were both deeply personal and strategically vast. On an individual level, she shattered lives and marriages. One file details how she used evidence of a husband's infidelity not to blackmail the husband, but to torment his wife, a woman who had once mocked her accent. She sent the wife anonymous typed notes detailing her husband's movements, slowly driving a wedge of paranoia and heartbreak into the marriage until the wife suffered a very public nervous breakdown. On a larger scale, she influenced business and politics. She forced a congressman to change his vote on a key tariff bill that would have harmed her father's interests by threatening to reveal his illegitimate child, whose existence was documented in a birth certificate and a series of support payments hidden in the vault. She ensured her own family's business received favorable treatment from the city government by holding damning evidence over the head of a powerful alderman. Ultimately, the story of the blackmail file forces us to see the Gilded Age not as a simple fairy tale, but as a brutal social battlefield. While the public narrative was one of opulent balls and charitable works, the private reality for this heiress was a relentless shadow war. She weaponized the very discretion that the banking system was built upon, turning the secrets it was meant to protect into bullets for her own personal war of ascent. Her legacy, preserved in that cold, dark vault, is a stark reminder that behind the gilded curtains and the glittering jewels, the most powerful currency was often fear, and the most effective ladder to the top was one built on the broken reputations of others. The seventh and final secret from the vault plunges us into the cold, calculated world of dynastic succession, where the ultimate act of betrayal wasn't a stolen jewel or a hidden affair, but a forged signature on a last will and testament. This file, thick with legal documents and veiled in an aura of lingering bitterness, tells the story of the Huntington family, an old money dynasty from Philadelphia, and the will that disinherited the eldest son, a free-spirited artist, in favor of his more conventionally ambitious cousin. What makes this case so chilling is not just the alleged forgery, but the meticulous analysis contained within the file itself, an analysis commissioned by the bank and then deliberately buried, proving that the institution knew of the fraud but chose the preservation of family harmony and its own reputation over the demands of justice. The story begins with the patriarch, Augustus Huntington, a stern and uncompromising man who had built a formidable fortune in textiles and railroads. His relationship with his eldest son and natural heir, Theodore, was famously strained. Theodore had rejected the family business entirely, moving to Paris to pursue a life as a painter, a vocation his father viewed as not just frivolous, but a profound betrayal of their legacy. The favored cousin, Arthur, was everything Theodore was not. He was a shrewd businessman, politically connected, and utterly dedicated to expanding the Huntington Empire. The public expectation was that Theodore would receive a modest allowance to support his bohemian lifestyle, while the bulk of the fortune and control of the companies would pass to Arthur. However, a previous will, drafted years earlier and witnessed by the family lawyer, had still named Theodore as the primary heir, a legal formality that reflected the patriarch's lingering, if disappointed, sense of tradition. Upon Augustus Huntington's sudden death from a heart attack, a new will was presented by Arthur and the family's new solicitor. This document was nothing short of a dynastic coup. It was shockingly absolute, cutting Theodore out entirely, leaving him with a paltry trust fund that generated just enough income to avoid outright poverty, and bequeathing everything else: the companies, the real estate, the art collection, the entire fortune, to Arthur. The justification within the will was brutally personal, citing Theodore's willful dereliction of familial duty and his unsuitable associations and lifestyle as reasons for his disinheritance. Theodore was devastated, not merely by the financial loss, but by the posthumous character assassination from his own father. He was convinced the document was a fake, but he lacked the resources and the evidence to challenge his powerful cousin in a protracted legal fight. This is where the bank's secret file becomes the key to the entire mystery. Theodore, in a moment of desperation, appealed directly to the senior partner at Fifth Avenue National, who had managed his father's accounts for decades. The banker, bound by his oath to the client, who was now the estate of the deceased, was in an impossible position. He could not openly side with Theodore, but his professional integrity was deeply unsettled by the new will. Secretly, and using the bank's own resources, he commissioned a private, disinterested handwriting expert from London to conduct a forensic analysis of the disputed signature. The expert's report, now brittle with age but devastating in its clarity, is the centerpiece of the vault file. It did not just suggest forgery, it meticulously documented it, providing the technical proof that Theodore could never have obtained on his own. The analysis notes are a masterclass in detection. The expert pointed out several telltale signs of what is known as pictorial forgery, where the forger focuses on replicating the image of a signature rather than the natural motor movements used to create it. He noted a slight, almost imperceptible tremor in the downstroke of the G in Augustus, a hesitation that is common when a forger slows down to carefully copy a shape. The pressure patterns analyzed under a magnifier were inconsistent. The genuine signatures from the bank's own records showed a confident, fluid application of ink, while the will's signature had areas of uneven pressure, indicating a painstaking, deliberate effort. Most damning of all was the expert's observation of a tiny ink blob at the very start of the signature, a classic sign of the forger's pen pausing on the paper before beginning the unnatural act of tracing another person's hand. Armed with this irrefutable evidence, the bank faced a monumental ethical dilemma. To expose the forgery would mean unleashing a scandal of epic proportions, publicly shaming the new heir Arthur, likely sending him to prison, and dragging the revered Huntington name through the mud. It would also expose the bank to potential legal liability and irreparably damage its reputation for discretion. The internal memoranda within the file reveal the tortured debate among the senior partners. One wrote, "We have a moral duty to the truth, but a professional duty to the estate as it is now constituted." Another argued, "To act on this would be to destroy 2 generations of a family. Our duty is to preserve, not to demolish." In the end, the forces of silence prevailed. The bank made the conscious decision to file the expert's report away in the hidden vault, classifying it under the strictest confidentiality, and to accept the forged will as the legal instrument of record. The resolution, as documented in the final correspondence, was a quiet, private, and deeply cynical settlement. The bankers, acting as neutral intermediaries, summoned Theodore and Arthur to a closed-door meeting. They did not present the forgery report. Instead, they used its existence as an unspoken threat, a weapon they held sheathed. They pressured Arthur, who was likely aware of the damning evidence the bank possessed, to agree to a more generous financial settlement for his cousin. Theodore's paltry trust fund was significantly increased, providing him with a lifetime of genuine comfort, though it was a fraction of the empire he should have inherited. In exchange, Theodore was made to sign a legally binding agreement to never contest the will or make any public statements about the inheritance. It was a transaction that bought his silence and secured Arthur's illegitimate reign. The truth was sacrificed on the altar of appearances. The rightful heir was paid off, and the forger, whether it was Arthur or someone he hired, got away with one of the most intimate crimes possible, all with the bank's secret complicity, its vault becoming the tomb for a justice that was deemed too expensive to ever see the light of day. The 8th and perhaps most culturally devastating secret from the vault uncovers a crime not just against a person, but against history itself. Nestled within a collection of shipping manifests and gallery invoices is a complete provenance file for a painting that currently holds a place of honor in a world-renowned museum, celebrated as a jewel of its European Old Masters collection. The documents, however, tell a radically different story. They meticulously trace the painting's true journey, proving it was looted by occupying forces from a private collection in France during a time of war, and then laundered into the legitimate art market through a conspiracy between a highly respected New York art dealer and a socially ambitious American heiress who used her name and fortune to sanitize the theft. The masterpiece at the heart of this scheme is a luminous 17th century Dutch interior scene, a painting known for its exquisite play of light and quiet domestic drama. Today, its museum placard describes a straightforward ownership history, mentioning a succession of noble European collectors before its acquisition by the museum in the early 1950s. The vault's file, stamped with the logo of the now-defunct Laurent Gallery, reveals that this public history is a carefully constructed fiction. The true story begins with a single, heartbreaking document, a handwritten inventory from a chateau in the French countryside, dated just months before the outbreak of war. On that list, described in perfect detail, is the very same painting, noted as a cherished family possession for over 200 years. The chateau was occupied, its owners forced to flee, and their entire collection was systematically confiscated as spoils of war, disappearing into the chaotic black market of the era. The art dealer, a man revered for his impeccable eye and ethical reputation, was the central architect of the laundering process. His gallery on Fifth Avenue was a temple of high culture, a place where newly wealthy industrialists went to buy instant legitimacy and old families discreetly sold their treasures. The file shows that he acquired the looted painting through a shadowy intermediary in Switzerland, paying a fraction of its true value. He knew exactly what he was buying. His own handwritten notes on the bill of sale cryptically state, "The Vermeer of the War Valley," a clear reference to the painting's infamous origin. His genius was not in finding the painting, but in crafting a new, plausible past for it. He employed a gifted art student to create a fake paper trail, forging exhibition labels from minor 19th century salons and inventing a chain of ownership that linked the work to a fictitious branch of a German aristocratic family, knowing their records had been destroyed in the conflict, making his story nearly impossible to disprove. This is where the heiress entered the scheme, her role as vital as it was cynical. She was the wife of a steel magnate, a woman desperate to cement her family's status as cultural benefactors, not just industrial titans. The dealer approached her with a proposition. She would use her substantial funds to purchase the painting from his gallery at a price that reflected its newly created, clean provenance. This transaction, conducted in the full light of day and reported in the society pages, would instantly legitimize the work. She would then hold it for a short, respectable period, perhaps lending it to a prestigious museum exhibition to further burnish its credentials, before finally donating it to the major museum as a grand philanthropic gesture. In doing so, she would receive a massive tax deduction, immense public acclaim, and a permanent plaque with her family name etched beside a masterpiece, all while performing the final, crucial step of washing the stolen artwork clean of its sordid history. The financial mechanics, laid bare in the bank's ledgers, reveal the deceptive simplicity of the plot. The heiress's payment to the gallery was processed through her numbered account, the funds seamlessly transferring to the dealer. But in a separate, confidential ledger entry, the banker notated a subsequent, much smaller transfer from the dealer's business account back to a private, personal account held by the heiress. This second, secret payment was her kickback, a reward for her role in the deception. She was not merely a dupe. She was a knowing and compensated accomplice. Her donation was, in reality, a complex financial transaction that bought her family prestige with a stolen object, funded in part by the very man who had trafficked in looted art. The museum, eager to accept such a significant gift from a prominent donor, performed only a perfunctory provenance check, relying on the impeccable reputation of the dealer and the heiress, and thus unknowingly enshrining a crime at the heart of its collection. The human cost of this deception stretches across decades and continents. The file contains a later, feudal letter from the grandson of the original French owners, written in the 1960s. Having spent years piecing together the fate of his family's collection, he had somehow traced the painting to the American Museum. He wrote a polite but firm letter to the director, outlining his claim and including a copy of the same inventory that sits in the vault. The museum's brief, dismissive reply is also included, citing its own extensively researched provenance provided by the esteemed Laurent Gallery and the upstanding donor. The grandson lacked the resources and the legal standing to fight a transatlantic battle against such powerful institutions. His letter is a quiet testament to a legacy interrupted, a connection to his family's past hanging just beyond his reach on a public wall, its true story silenced by a forged pedigree and the complicity of the elite. This secret forces a profound and uncomfortable reevaluation of the very foundations of our cultural institutions. That painting, admired by millions of visitors, is more than a beautiful object. It is a monument to a double crime, the original act of wartime looting and the subsequent cold-blooded cover-up that allowed Western museums to build their collections with plundered treasures. The respected dealer and the philanthropic heiress were not patrons of the arts in any true sense. They were fences and launders on a grand scale, using their social capital to perpetrate a fraud against history. The bank's vault, in preserving the unvarnished evidence, holds the key to restorative justice, offering a documented truth that could, even now, begin to undo a generation's old wrong and return a fragment of a stolen heritage to its rightful heirs. The ninth secret to emerge from the vault's silent archives pulls back the curtain on a figure celebrated for his public valor, only to reveal a private life of reckless compulsion. The file, stamped with the seal of a prestigious London gentlemen's club, details the catastrophic gambling debts of a British military hero, a man knighted for his bravery in colonial campaigns and hailed as a paragon of Victorian manhood. While the public saw a man of unimpeachable honor and discipline, the private ledgers reveal a terrifyingly different portrait, a man enslaved by the turn of a card and the roll of the dice, whose secret habit was systematically draining his family's ancient estates and threatening to plunge his entire lineage into public disgrace and financial ruin. This was not a temporary lapse in judgment, but a sustained, secret campaign of self-destruction that played out in the hushed, smoke-filled back rooms of clubs from Mayfair to Monte Carlo. The scale of his losses was staggering, documented in a series of promissory notes and IOUs that grew increasingly desperate over a period of nearly 2 decades. A single night at the tables in Baden-Baden could see him lose the equivalent of a year's income from his country estate. The file contains one particularly damning voucher from a single hand of baccarat, a slip of paper where the sum scrawled in ink would have been enough to rebuild every tenant farmer's cottage on his land. His creditors were not patient men. They were a shadowy network of professional moneylenders and fellow aristocrats who understood the power they held over him. The promissory notes often carried exorbitant, almost punitive rates of interest, turning each temporary loan into a spiraling, inescapable trap. The hero of the empire was, in his private life, being slowly financially bled by sharks who knew his reputation was his most valuable asset and therefore his greatest vulnerability. His salvation and the mechanism of his continued secrecy came from an unexpected source, his American wife. He had married the daughter of a New York railroad tycoon in a much-publicized union that was seen as a perfect blend of old world title and new world capital. Her immense dowry was intended to refurbish his ancestral home and secure the family's future. Instead, as the file starkly reveals, it became his personal bailout fund. The bankers at Fifth Avenue National were instructed to establish a complex system of revolving loans. When a gambling debt came due, the bank would extend a loan from the heiress's personal trust, using her capital as collateral. The general would then sign a new promissory note, not to the shady creditor, but to the bank itself, promising to repay the loan with interest. This created a veneer of respectability, transforming a sordid gambling debt into a formal, private loan between a husband and his wife's estate, a transaction that could be explained away, if necessary, as an investment in estate improvements or a new business venture. The true genius and tragedy of this arrangement was its circular futility. The general was not repaying the loans from the bank. He was merely using them to stay one step ahead of his other creditors. The interest on the bank loans would accumulate, and when that pressure became too great, he would often resort to gambling again in a desperate attempt to win back enough to clear his obligations, invariably digging the hole even deeper. His wife, aware of the situation through the discreet summaries provided by the bankers, was trapped in a gilded cage of her own. To expose him would mean destroying the heroic reputation she had married into and bringing social ruin upon her children. So she continued to authorize the transfers, her fortune slowly being converted into a financial shield for her husband's addiction, her love and her social ambition locking her into a cycle of enabling his self-destruction. The bank's ledgers became a grim scorecard of this domestic tragedy, each entry a testament to a wife's quiet desperation and a hero's crumbling honor. The most profound risk, however, was not the loss of money, but the exposure of the lie. Had the true state of the general's finances become public, it would have triggered a cascade of disasters. His military career would have been instantly terminated. An officer and a gentleman could not be seen as a common debtor. The social standing of his entire family would have evaporated, making them pariahs in the very circles they were meant to lead. Furthermore, the solvency of his estates was a fiction maintained by these secret loans. If creditors had called in their notes, the lands would have been seized and sold off, obliterating centuries of heritage in a matter of months. The American fortune, rather than being a source of renewal, had become the fuel for a slow-burning fuse attached to the family's entire legacy. The bankers, in managing this delicate deception, were not just moving money. They were actively propping up a carefully constructed public image that was, in reality, a hollow shell, knowing that the entire edifice could come crashing down with a single leaked document or a whisper at the wrong club. In the end, the file on the debt of dishonor reveals a poignant and painful truth about the Gilded Age's obsession with appearance. The pressure to maintain the facade of effortless grace and unshakable honor was so immense that it drove a celebrated war hero to live a double life of secret shame and financial panic. His bravery on the battlefield was undeniable, but his greatest battle was fought in silence against an enemy within, and it was a battle he was steadily losing. The vault preserved the evidence of this intimate collapse, not as a condemnation of the man, but as a stark reminder of the human cost of a society that valued the gilded mask far more than the troubled face that wore it. The 10th and perhaps most foundational secret locked within the vault strikes at the very heart of what it means to be an heir, a successor, and a carrier of a bloodline. This file, contained within a simple, unmarked box tied with a now brittle legal ribbon, holds a story of dynastic desperation so profound it involved the complete fabrication of an heir. Inside are the adoption papers for a baby boy, born to an impoverished young mother from the tenements of New York, who was then presented to the world as the natural-born son and sole heir of a childless French duke and his American wife. This was not an act of charity, but a cold, calculated transaction designed to prevent a centuries-old noble house from vanishing into history, a conspiracy of silence that involved a paid-off mother, a complicit doctor, and a set of birth records so convincingly forged they would stand for generations. The crisis began with the Duke and Duchess de Valois. He was the last direct male descendant of a line that could trace its origins back to the Crusades, a man burdened by the weight of his name and the escalating pressure to produce a son. She, the daughter of a wealthy San Francisco mining family, was adored for her charm and her fortune. But after a decade of marriage and several tragic miscarriages, it became devastatingly clear that they would have no children of their own. Under the strict laws of primogeniture that governed the Duke's title and estates, his death without a legitimate male heir would mean the title would become extinct. The family shadow and lands would pass to a distant, disreputable cousin, and his wife would be left with a generous income but no legacy. The very existence of the House of Valois was hanging by a thread, a fact that colored every public appearance and private moment with a tinge of impending doom. The solution was engineered not in a French shadow, but in a private study on Fifth Avenue, where the Duke's American banker and legal advisor presented a radical and ruthless plan. Through a discreet network of contacts that included a midwife and a social worker, they identified a young, unmarried Irish immigrant woman who had just given birth to a healthy boy in a charitable hospital. She was desperate, alone, and saw no future for herself or her child. The intermediaries approached her with an offer that, in her circumstances, must have seemed like a miracle. In exchange for signing away all rights to her son and vowing to never attempt to contact him, she would receive a one-time payment of $5,000, a life-changing sum, and a steamship ticket to a new start in Australia, with a small monthly stipend to be paid into an account there for 1 year. The documents include her signed agreement, her shaky signature a stark contrast to the elegant script of the lawyers, a permanent record of a mother's heartbreaking choice made under the immense pressure of poverty and hope. The medical side of the deception was orchestrated with chilling precision. The family's personal physician, a man whose own reputation and lucrative practice were tied to the Duke's patronage, certified that the Duchess was expecting a child. He documented a false pregnancy, complete with notes on morning sickness and weight gain, in her medical file. When the time came, the Duchess and her entire household traveled to a secluded villa in the south of France, a common practice for wealthy women of the era. It was there that the birth was staged. The doctor's official certificate, filed with the local French authorities, records the birth of a son to the Duke and Duchess at the villa. The adoption papers, signed months earlier in New York, were never filed with any court. Their sole purpose was to formalize the transfer for the bank's private records and to secure the mother's legal silence. The real baby was smuggled into the villa, and the Duchess, after a period of secluded convalescence, emerged presenting the child as her own. The bankers were the silent architects and perpetual guardians of this immense lie. They managed every financial aspect, from the initial payment to the birth mother to the establishment of the trust fund that would appear to be for the Duchess's medical expenses. They held the only set of documents that connected the adopted child, who would grow up as the Crown Prince of Valois, to his true origins. Their confidential ledgers contained the coded entries that tracked the monthly stipend to the mother in Australia, ensuring her continued silence thousands of miles away. They understood that they were not just managing money, they were curating a reality, actively sustaining a fiction that was now the bedrock of a noble house. The child, raised in unimaginable luxury and groomed from infancy to inherit a dukedom, lived his entire life completely unaware that the blood flowing in his veins was not that of the ancient warriors whose portraits lined the gallery walls. His entire identity, a beautiful, gilded construct, paid for by his parents' desperation and protected by a banker's vow. We have seen the personal dramas and the high-stakes deceptions, but to truly understand the world these vault records unveil, we must pull back to see one of the grandest social experiments of the era: the systematic exchange of American fortune for European title. The young women at the center of this exchange, the so-called dollar princesses, have often been portrayed as ambitious social climbers, eager to trade their new money for old prestige. Yet the documents in the vault compel us to see them in a different, far more poignant light. They were, in the cold calculus of international finance and dynastic survival, human collateral in a high-stakes rescue operation for crumbling aristocratic houses. Their romantic futures were often the final, desperate line of credit for families on the verge of losing everything. The scale of this transatlantic trade was staggering, driven by a perfect storm of necessity and opportunity. On one side of the Atlantic, the old European aristocracy was land-rich but cash-poor. Centuries of entailments, which legally prevented the sale of ancestral estates, combined with agricultural depressions and the soaring costs of maintaining a noble lifestyle, had left many dukes and counts functionally bankrupt. They owned thousands of acres and castles filled with art, but they lacked the liquid capital to repair a leaking roof, much less pay off the mortgages that were quietly accruing in their bankers' ledgers. On the other side, America's Industrial Revolution had created fortunes of a size and liquidity that Europe hadn't seen since the days of the Roman emperors. Men like Vanderbilt, Good, and Rockefeller possessed wealth that could eclipse the reserves of small nations, but they lacked the one thing their money couldn't easily buy in democratic America: the unquestioned social status and historical legitimacy that came with the title. The marriage market became the solution to both problems, but it was a market governed by brutally clear-eyed negotiation, not fairy tale romance. The negotiations were handled not by the young couple, but by teams of lawyers, bankers, and family agents who treated the union as a complex merger and acquisition. The young American woman, raised in relative freedom and often educated to be independent, was frequently the last to know the full terms of the deal being struck on her behalf. Her dowry, a sum that could be in the millions of dollars, was not a gift. It was a direct capital injection, a bailout package designed to clear the ancestral debts of her future husband's family, re-roof his castle, and restore his depleted farms. In return, her family received the ultimate status symbol, a title for their daughter, and, by extension, a permanent place in the annals of European nobility for their bloodline. The personal cost for these young women was immense and often hidden behind the glittering public weddings. They were shipped off to foreign countries to live in cold, drafty castles with husbands they barely knew and in-laws who often viewed them with a mixture of gratitude and condescension. Their vast fortunes were immediately absorbed into the estate, leaving them financially dependent on the very families they had just saved. Their American habits were seen as vulgar, their accents mocked, and their lack of ancient lineage a constant source of subtle humiliation. The vault contains heartbreaking letters from one such bride, a Miss Consuelo Wilson, who wrote to her father after 6 months in a Scottish castle. "They drink my tea and walk on my carpets, and yet I am made to feel I am the one who is forever in their debt for the privilege of being here. I am a tenant in the house my own money restored." Perhaps the most tragic aspect, revealed in the confidential memos between bankers, was the sheer number of these heiresses who were deliberately kept ignorant of the true state of their husbands' finances. A father, eager to secure the highest-ranking title possible, might intentionally withhold from his daughter the fact that the French duke she was to marry was not just a little in debt, but was actually on the brink of a foreclosure so complete it would have made headlines across the continent. The bankers facilitating the transfer of the dowry funds knew the exact figures. They saw the ledgers showing that the dowry would not just supplement the family's income, but would be used to pay off creditors who were literally at the gates. The young bride would arrive at her new home believing she was entering a world of stable, ancient privilege, only to slowly discover that she was the sole pillar preventing the entire structure from collapsing into dust, a realization that could breed a deep and lasting resentment. Yet to cast them solely as victims is to overlook the astonishing resilience and agency many eventually cultivated. While some were broken by the isolation and pressure, others learned to navigate the complex waters of European society with a skill that stunned their critics. They used their money and their newfound positions to become formidable patronesses of the arts, ambitious hostesses who influenced political discourse, and philanthropists on a scale their European counterparts could never have imagined. A woman like Jenny Jerome, who became Lady Randolph Churchill, did not just fund her husband's political career. She became a powerful political intellect in her own right, directly shaping the environment that produced one of the 20th century's most significant figures. They became the modernizers, often using their American sensibilities to drag ancient institutions, however reluctantly, into a new era. The vault, in the end, doesn't just hold their contracts. It holds the records of their complex legacy, a testament to the young women who were shipped across the ocean as pawns in a financial game, but who, in countless cases, ended up rewriting the rules entirely. Moving from the deeply personal betrayals of forged wills and fabricated heirs, we now enter the cold, intricate world of financial architecture, where wealth was not just hidden, but systematically made intangible and untouchable. The vault's records reveal that the elite of the Gilded Age were pioneers of a sophisticated system of wealth concealment, employing complex legal instruments like discretionary trusts and early offshore companies with a foresight that feels remarkably modern. These were not simple hiding places for money. They were elaborate labyrinths designed to protect fortunes from the three great threats of the era: escalating government taxation, increasingly aggressive creditors, and the most persistent danger of all, family members who felt they had been unfairly cut out of an inheritance. At the heart of this system was the discretionary trust, a financial mechanism of elegant and formidable power. To understand its genius, you must first forget the modern concept of a simple trust where money is left to a beneficiary. A discretionary trust was something far more fluid and intentionally opaque. A wealthy individual, known as the settler, would transfer their assets, cash, stocks, bonds, even entire company shares, to the legal ownership of a trust. But this trust would not have a fixed list of beneficiaries with clear entitlements. Instead, it would name a class of potential beneficiaries, which could be as vague as my descendants or persons nominated by the trustees. The critical power lay with the trustees, the individuals, or more commonly, the bankers themselves, who were given absolute discretion over which beneficiary received any income or capital from the trust, and when they received it. The sheer brilliance of this setup was its ability to make wealth legally invisible and practically unreachable. Because no single beneficiary had a fixed right to the trust's assets, those assets could not be seized by a beneficiary's creditors. If a duke's son ran up colossal gambling debts, his creditors could not lay a finger on the family fortune because the son had no legal claim to it. The money belonged to the trust, and the bankers alone decided if and when he got a penny. This same principle applied to spurned relatives. A disinherited cousin could launch a lawsuit, but he would be suing a phantom, a legal entity that owed him nothing. The trust was a fortress, and the bankers held the only key, allowing them to provide for the family as they saw fit, while making the family's collective wealth virtually judgment-proof. The geographic dimension of this secrecy was just as advanced, involving the deliberate use of early offshore jurisdictions. The ledgers show a clear preference for establishing these trusts and holding companies in places like the Channel Islands, the Isle of Man, and certain Swiss cantons. These locations were chosen not for their tropical climates, but for their emerging legal frameworks that prioritized privacy and resisted foreign legal inquiries. A typical structure might involve a New York industrialist transferring his ownership of a railroad company to a newly formed corporation registered in Jersey. This corporation's shares would then be held by a discretionary trust, also established under Jersey law, with the Fifth Avenue National Bank named as the trustee. The industrialist on paper owned nothing. The income from the railroad would flow to the Jersey Corporation, where it was subject to minimal local taxes, and the bankers in New York, as trustees, would have the power to distribute that income to the industrialist and his family as they saw fit, completely bypassing American creditors and tax authorities. The role of the banker in this labyrinth was absolutely pivotal, transforming them from mere money managers into de facto shadow governors of these private financial dynasties. They were the permanent professional trustees, the stable element in a system designed to outlive its creator. A patriarch could die, but the trust endured, and the bankers continued to execute his wishes, or their interpretation of his wishes, for generations. They held meetings where they would solemnly consider the needs of the various family members, their decisions recorded in cryptic minutes that spoke of distributions to beneficiary A, or capital preservation for the primary line. This gave them an almost paternalistic power over the lives of the wealthy, deciding which son was responsible enough to receive an allowance to start a business, or which daughter would be granted a dowry upon her marriage. It was a profound and often unacknowledged transfer of authority from the family to the financial institution. These structures also facilitated more aggressive strategies, particularly in the realm of tax avoidance, which became a pressing concern as Western governments began to introduce income and inheritance taxes to fund public works and social programs. The vault contains stunning examples of pre-tax planning, where vast swaths of a family's assets were transferred into an offshore discretionary trust years before a new tax law was even proposed. The legal fiction created was that the patriarch no longer owned the assets. The trust did. Therefore, when he died, there was no estate to tax in the traditional sense. The government could only tax the assets that were formally in his name at death, which, thanks to this foresight, was a negligible amount. The real fortune had already sailed away on paper to a corporate entity in Geneva or sent. Hellier, safe from the taxman's grasp. The human impact of these cold financial instruments, however, could be deeply personal and sometimes cruel. The very discretion that made the trust so powerful could also be weaponized within families. The files include anguished letters from a younger son who had fallen in love with a woman his parents disapproved of. The bankers, acting on the late father's secret, unwritten instructions, informed the son that the trustees had exercised their discretion to deny him the capital he needed to buy a home and start his life, effectively holding his inheritance hostage to force him to abandon the relationship. In another case, a strong-willed widow found that her access to the trust income was suddenly curtailed after she began publicly supporting women's suffrage, a clear message from the male trustees that her financial independence was contingent on her social conformity. The trust, designed as a shield, could also become a cage, with the bankers as the jailers, using the power of the purse to enforce social norms and control behavior from beyond the grave. This complex web of trusts and offshore holdings represents the ultimate expression of Gilded Age secrecy. It was no longer about hiding a single transaction or a secret heir. It was about building an entire parallel financial universe, a ghostly echo of the visible economy where the rules of taxation, debt, and even familial obligation simply did not apply. The bankers were not just keeping secrets. They were the chief architects of a system that allowed the elite to operate with a degree of freedom and impunity that was unimaginable to the average citizen. The labyrinth was so well constructed, its walls so high and its paths so convoluted, that it has taken more than a century for us to even begin to map its contours from the blueprints left behind in that forgotten vault. Of course, the very nature of these explosive secrets demanded a parallel system of communication, one just as carefully concealed as the financial transactions themselves. The vault's archives reveal that alongside the numbered accounts and clandestine trusts existed an entire shadow lexicon, a world of coded correspondence that allowed the elite to discuss their most sensitive affairs under the noses of servants, rival family members, and even government censors. This wasn't just about romance or gossip. It was a necessary tool for managing the vast, invisible empires they were building, ensuring that a telegram clerk in London or a postal worker in New York would see only gibberish where there were, in fact, instructions moving fortunes and shaping destinies. The most intimate of these codes were found tucked within the personal love letters, a poignant attempt to safeguard fragile emotions and dangerous liaisons. A bundle of correspondence between a German baron and an American actress, for instance, used a beautifully simple substitution cipher. Each letter of the alphabet was shifted by a fixed number of places, so that it became D, B became E, and so on. A sentence like, "I long for your kiss," would be transcribed as L orch uru burix UNLV. To the untrained eye, it was nonsense. But for the two lovers, it was a private world, a shared secret that made their forbidden connection feel both thrilling and secure. They would often hide the key to the cipher within the letter itself, perhaps in the pattern of the first letters of each paragraph or a reference to a book they both owned. This wasn't about high finance. It was about creating a sanctuary for the heart in a world that judged their relationship harshly. A small act of defiance written in a language only they could understand. But when the stakes involved millions of dollars in international diplomacy, these simple ciphers were abandoned for something far more robust: complex commercial codes. These were not homemade puzzles, but published, book-length volumes that assigned unique 5-letter code words to thousands of common phrases, names, and numbers. A banker in New York needing to instruct his London counterpart to transfer $100,000 from account Peregrine to the Banque de France would not write that out. Instead, he would consult his copy of the ABC code or the Bentley's complete phrase code. He would find the code groups for each piece of the instruction. Transfer might be Azulwo, $100,000 could be Kelmy, and Banque de France might be Podex. His entire telegram would read like a string of random letters. Azulwo Kelmy from Peregrine to Podex. To anyone intercepting the message, it was incomprehensible commercial noise. But to the receiving banker, who held an identical copy of the codebook, it was a clear and direct order. The genius of these commercial codes was their deniability and efficiency. A telegram filled with plaintext instructions to move vast sums of money would have raised immediate red flags, potentially alerting rivals or tax authorities. A string of code words, however, looked like standard business practice, the benign chatter of global commerce. Furthermore, telegrams were charged by the word, and these codes provided immense savings. A single 5-letter code word like banco could represent an entire sentence such as, "We have credited your account as per your instructions dated the 15th. This allowed for detailed, confidential communication across the Atlantic at a fraction of the cost and with near total security, assuming both parties guarded their codebooks with the same ferocity they applied to their vaults. The vault's files contain stunning examples of this in action. One folder holds a series of telegrams between a New York bank and a Swiss asset manager. The raw telegrams are sheets of pasted tape with seemingly random groupings. Oxford Tulip Sunrise Delta Merit. The file also contains the deciphered translations, written on a separate sheet in a banker's neat hand. Oxford Tulip, translated to, purchased 50,000 shares of Northern Pacific Railroad. Sunrise Delta Mint use intermediary account Helvetia 4 for settlement. And Merit was the code for confirm execution by return wire. This was the heartbeat of the secret economy, a pulse of encrypted instructions that moved markets and consolidated fortunes without a single clear instruction ever being spoken or written in plain language. Sometimes the codes were used for more than just efficiency. They were a shield against existential threats. During periods of political unrest, aristocratic families with assets spread across Europe and America used these coded telegrams to orchestrate the flight of their capital. A message reading, "Gale forecast suggests relocation of all assets," might be the pre-arranged signal that a revolution was imminent, triggering a flurry of coded wires to liquidate holdings, transfer gold bullion, and move funds to the safety of New York. The ability to communicate this quickly and secretly was often the difference between saving a dynasty and losing everything to confiscation or war. The code books were, in their own way, as vital as the deeds to their estates, and they were often stored together in the same secure locations, a testament to the fact that in the modern world, information had become the most critical form of property. Yet, the most intriguing codes found in the vault were the completely bespoke, one-of-a-kind systems devised for a single, highly sensitive purpose. We find one such example in the file of an American senator who was secretly on the payroll of a powerful industrial conglomerate. To communicate the senator's voting intentions on key legislation, his handler used a code based on fruit prices listed in a specific New York newspaper. A published price of apples, $1 per bushel, might mean the senator was a firm yes on a tariff bill. Peaches, 90 cents, could signal a no vote. Oranges, 110, might indicate he was undecided and needed more persuasion, which would often come in the form of a further campaign contribution delivered through the usual banking channels. This system was virtually unbreakable because it had no physical codebook and relied on a public, innocuous source, proving that the most effective secrets are often those hidden in plain sight, their true meaning known only to the conspirators who devised them. While the bankers provided the vault and the numbered accounts, they were only one part of a much larger and more intricate machine of secrecy. To actually execute the complex maneuvers required to hide an heir, annul a marriage, or launder a stolen painting, the elite relied on a specialized class of professional intermediaries. These were the shadowy lawyers, the discreet private secretaries, and the well-connected financial agents who operated in the gray areas between law, finance, and society. They were the indispensable grease in the gears of this clandestine world, the ones who knew which palms to grease, which documents needed to be lost, and which stories needed to be planted in the press to ensure a scandal was contained before it could ever break. At the very top of this ecosystem were a handful of elite law firms whose names were synonymous with discretion and whose services were more akin to strategic crisis management than traditional legal practice. These were not lawyers who argued cases in public courtrooms. They were the men you summoned to your private library after midnight. Their expertise was not in the law itself, but in the art of navigating around it. They understood statute books not as guides for justice, but as a series of obstacles to be circumvented and loopholes to be exploited. A single partner at such a firm might spend his entire career managing the affairs of just 2 or 3 fabulously wealthy families, becoming a de facto member of the household, a keeper of secrets so profound that his continued silence was worth a fortune in retainers. He was the architect of the preemptive legal strike, drafting the secret wills and binding covenants that would disinherit a secret child decades before the patriarch even died, ensuring the truth could never successfully challenge the official narrative in a court of law. Perhaps the most fascinating and underappreciated figures in this network were the private secretaries. These were not mere clerical assistants. They were highly educated, often multilingual, and possessed of an almost preternatural ability to anticipate their employer's needs and deflect potential threats. A skilled private secretary to a duke or a millionaire industrialist was a master of logistics, intelligence, and social diplomacy. He was the one who screened all correspondence, knowing instinctively which letters to place on top of the pile and which to discreetly lose in a drawer. He managed his employer's complex schedule, ensuring that a meeting with a mistress in Paris never overlapped with a family holiday in Biarritz. He served as a trusted courier, hand-delivering sensitive documents or cash payments across the continent, his impassive face and unwavering loyalty making him a more secure communication channel than any telegraph. The role often extended into outright espionage. A private secretary might be tasked with quietly investigating the background of a potential son-in-law, using his network of contacts to uncover hidden debts or improper associations. He would be the one to negotiate with newspaper editors, using a combination of flattery, social pressure, and sometimes direct payment to suppress an unflattering story. In an era before modern public relations, the private secretary was the chief guardian of his employer's public image, a spin doctor who worked not with press releases, but with whispered conversations at gentlemen's clubs and carefully worded denials. His power was entirely derivative, but it was immense, for he controlled the flow of information to and from the most powerful people in the world, and his loyalty was the final barrier between a private scandal and a public catastrophe. Then there were the fixers, a more eclectic and shadowy group whose operations existed entirely in the moral and legal penumbra. These individuals were professional problem solvers, men and occasionally women who possessed what was known as savoir-faire, the knowledge of how to get things done. A fixer might be a retired diplomat who maintained his connections in foreign capitals, a former Pinkerton detective with a knack for finding compromising information, or a socialite with an uncanny ability to bring the right people together for a mutually beneficial, if clandestine, arrangement. They had no official titles and often no fixed address, operating from hotel suites and private dining rooms. Their currency was not money, though they were handsomely paid, but rather their extensive web of contacts and their reputation for delivering results with absolute discretion. The types of problems a fixer might be hired to resolve were as varied as the secrets they protected. One case file from the vault details the work of a fixer known only by the initial J, who was retained by the family of a prominent senator. The senator's son had been involved in a hit-and-run carriage accident while intoxicated, a scandal that could have ended a political career. Jay did not work through the legal system. Instead, within 24 hours, he had located the injured party, a shopkeeper, and negotiated a private, outsized financial settlement that included a clause of perpetual silence. He then arranged for the senator's son to immediately embark on a grand tour of Asia until the matter was entirely forgotten. The public never learned a thing. In another instance, a fixer was used to safely extract a valuable art collection from a country on the brink of revolution, bribing border guards and arranging for a neutral ship to transport the crates, all while the official owners were still publicly proclaiming their loyalty to the crumbling regime. These three groups, the lawyers, the secretaries, and the fixers, formed a symbiotic triangle of secrecy. The lawyer provided the legal framework and the air of respectability. The private secretary controlled the daily flow of information and access. The fixer handled the dirty, hands-on work that existed outside the law. They rarely interacted directly, their communications often filtered through the banker, who acted as the central, neutral hub. A duke would not call a fixer himself. He would mention the problem to his banker, who would then discreetly engage the services of a reliable fixer through a coded message, with the payment routed through a series of anonymous accounts. This layered system ensured that the wealthy client always had what we now call plausible deniability. They could truthfully say they had never met the man who bribed the official or silenced the blackmailer, because the entire transaction had been handled through a chain of trusted, silent intermediaries. The psychological profile of these key players is as fascinating as their deeds. What kind of person chooses a career built entirely on concealing the truth? For some, it was a deep-seated belief in the existing social hierarchy, a conviction that the stability of the nation rested on the stability of its great families, and that therefore, any action taken to preserve that stability, no matter how legally or morally questionable, was justified. For others, it was the intoxicating allure of proximity to power. A private secretary might earn a modest salary, but he lived in a palace, traveled on private trains, and enjoyed the reflected glow of his employer's prestige. For the lawyers and fixers, the motivation was often a combination of immense financial reward and the intellectual satisfaction of solving an impossibly complex, high-stakes puzzle. They were the ultimate gamers in a world where the stakes were reputations, fortunes, and sometimes even lives. And their victory condition was always, invariably, silence. Every secret locked away in that steel vault began its life as a flashpoint, a single moment when a person of wealth and power faced an impossible choice. It could be the desperate passion of a prince for a woman he could not marry, the chilling greed of a countess staring at financial ruin, or the calculated political ambition of an industrialist seeking to bend a foreign nation to his will. These were not casual decisions, but existential crossroads where the established order, the sanctity of a bloodline, the integrity of a reputation, the stability of a fortune, was suddenly and profoundly threatened. In that instant, the secret was born, not as a mere piece of information, but as a living, dangerous entity that demanded immediate and permanent containment. The individuals at the heart of these moments understood that the truth, if it ever escaped, would act like a corrosive agent, eating away at the very foundations of their carefully constructed world. Once the decision was made to conceal the truth, the machinery of secrecy would click into motion with the smooth, practiced efficiency of a well-oiled clock. This was never a one-person operation. It required a coordinated team of trusted professionals, each playing their part in building the lie. The first step was almost always a visit to the family's banker, the one person who could transform a volatile human problem into a series of sterile, manageable financial transactions. In the quiet of a wood-paneled office, the crisis was laid bare. The banker's role was to listen, assess, and then begin the intricate work of constructing a financial shield. He would recommend the establishment of a numbered account or a blind trust, draft the documents for a clandestine payment, or outline the structure for a shell corporation overseas. His genius lay in his ability to translate scandal into spreadsheet, reducing heartbreak and betrayal to columns of debits and credits. Simultaneously, the legal architects would be summoned to fortify this financial framework with legally binding walls. These were the lawyers who specialized in preemptive strikes against the truth. Men who drafted secret codicils to wills, airtight annulment decrees, and unbreakable confidentiality agreements. Their work was not about justice, but about creating a parallel legal reality that could withstand any future challenge. They would secure sworn affidavits from pliant witnesses, file carefully backdated documents, and establish legal fictions so robust they could withstand the scrutiny of a court. Often, their most important job was to identify and neutralize potential leaks, which meant negotiating silence with everyone from a cast-off lover to a bribable official, their payments neatly routed through the banker's anonymous accounts. With the financial and legal structures in place, the physical evidence of the secret had to be dealt with. This is where the vault itself became the final, crucial repository. The secret was not destroyed. To burn a love letter or shred a damning contract was too risky. What if a single fragment survived? What if a servant saw the smoke? The elite understood that information, no matter how dangerous, was also a form of power. A document proving a secret heir could be used to control that heir in the future. Evidence of a political bribe was leverage over the corrupt official. Instead of destruction, they chose perfect preservation. The original marriage certificate, the pawn tickets for the stolen jewels, the codebook for the espionage telegrams, all of it was meticulously organized, placed into a leather-bound folio or a locked box, and then entrusted to the bankers for safekeeping. The vault was not a trash bin. It was a prison for truths too volatile to be allowed freedom, yet too valuable to be completely erased. For decades, sometimes for over a century, these secrets would lie dormant in their cool, dark tomb. They existed in a state of suspended animation, their power undiminished but contained. The world outside changed dramatically. Wars were fought, empires fell, social revolutions transformed daily life. But within the vault, time stood still. The secrets waited, outliving the people who created them, outliving the bankers who swore oaths to protect them, and outliving the very social codes that had made them so dangerous in the first place. The forgotten wall constructed in the 1950s was the final, unintentional layer of protection, a symbol of how these secrets slipped from being actively guarded to being utterly lost, their very existence fading from institutional memory until they became ghosts haunting the foundations of the bank itself. The moment of discovery, when the specialist team finally opened the vault in the late 1990s, was therefore not just an archaeological find. It was a rupture in time. The carefully maintained silence of a century was broken in an instant. The fine dust that puffed into the air was the dust of decomposed secrets, and the scent of aged leather and brittle paper was the aroma of 1,000 hidden stories finally taking their first breath of free air. The work lamps they brought in did more than just illuminate a dark room. They shone a light into the darkest corners of the Gilded Age, revealing the human frailties and moral compromises that the official history had worked so hard to obscure. The modern world, with its different values and its hunger for transparency, was about to collide with a world built on the absolute power of discretion. This raises the profound question: why go to such elaborate lengths to preserve what was so dangerous? Why not simply burn it all? The answer lies in the unique psychology of power and legacy in that era. For the elite, these documents were more than just evidence. They were the definitive, unvarnished record of how their world truly functioned. Destroying them would have been an act of historical self-mutilation, an admission that their legacy could not withstand the truth. Furthermore, the secrets often held ongoing utility. The file on a secret heir contained the mechanism for his continued control. The records of a political bribe ensured the continued cooperation of the official. These were live wires, and the bankers, as the perpetual guardians, needed the blueprint to know how to safely manage the current. The vault was, in a very real sense, the hidden control room for the gilded elite, and you do not destroy your own control panel, even if it contains buttons you hope you never have to press again. Its discovery was the ultimate failure of a system designed for perpetual secrecy, a system that finally, after 100 years, released its grip and allowed the past to speak in its own unedited voice. Imagine if that steel door had swung open, not in the calm of the late 1990s, but in the heat of the Gilded Age itself. The release of these secrets wouldn't have been a historical curiosity. It would have been a social and political detonation, a series of chain reactions capable of toppling governments, erasing fortunes, and rewriting the map of European nobility. The power held within those leather-bound ledgers wasn't just in the secrets themselves, but in their potential to unravel the very fabric of a society built on the meticulous curation of public image. A single file, pulled from the wrong box at the wrong moment, could have ignited a crisis with consequences stretching across the globe. Consider the political earthquake that would have followed the exposure of the industrialist's bribe to the European minister. The discovery of that Continental Transport and Development Corporation, in its true purpose, would have been more than a corruption scandal. It would have been an act of international aggression. The minister's government would have instantly collapsed, his party disgraced for selling national sovereignty to a foreign interest. The resulting parliamentary inquiry would have exposed a web of complicity, likely implicating other officials and military leaders who had benefited from the scheme. But the fallout wouldn't have stopped at that nation's borders. The United States government, already navigating a complex role on the world stage, would have faced a diplomatic firestorm. The revelation that an American captain of industry was secretly bribing a foreign power to start a war for his own profit would have shattered the nation's credibility, potentially leading to sanctions, the severing of diplomatic ties, and a profound crisis of faith in the entire capitalist system. The industrialist's empire would have crumbled overnight, his stock value plummeting to zero as investors fled and the government moved to seize his assets for crimes against the peace of nations. On a more personal, yet equally devastating level, the revelation of the prince's annulled marriage would have triggered a constitutional crisis. The prince, stripped of his succession rights the moment his marriage to the American commoner was proven, would have been cast out of the royal family, his titles and privileges revoked. The entire line of succession would have been thrown into chaos, creating a vacuum that rival branches of the family would have fought to fill, potentially leading to internal strife and legal battles lasting for generations. The legitimacy of the prince's subsequent, politically approved marriage and any children from that union would have been instantly voided, creating a dynastic black hole. The scandal would have been front-page news on every continent, a humiliating spectacle for a monarchy that derived its power from an aura of divine right and unshakable tradition. The public's faith in the institution would have been irreparably damaged, fueling Republican movements and forever tarnishing the crown with the stain of hypocrisy and cold-hearted calculation. The exposure of the society hostess operating as a foreign spy would have sown paranoia at the highest levels of American power. Every single politician, military officer, and industrialist who had ever attended one of her salons would have come under immediate and intense suspicion. Who else had unwittingly divulged secrets? Which battle plans had been compromised? Which legislative strategies had been fed to the enemy? The resulting witch hunt would have crippled the American war effort, as trust evaporated between colleagues and government agencies devolved into a frantic search for traitors. The hostess's arrest and trial would have been the trial of the century, but the real damage would have been the corrosion of the social and political networks that were essential to the nation's functioning. The very idea of a private social gathering among the elite would have become suspect, replaced by a climate of fear and mutual distrust that would have taken decades to heal. Then there is the sheer financial cataclysm that would have ensued from the mass unveiling of the hidden trusts, secret debts, and fabricated fortunes. If the contents of the leveraged portfolio had been made public, the blackmailer heiress would have triggered a domino effect of ruined reputations. The congressman forced to change his vote would have been expelled from office. The financier guilty of insider trading would have seen his firm collapse, triggering panic on the stock exchange. The countless marriages held together by appearances would have publicly shattered, creating a tidal wave of scandal that would have washed away the social standing of dozens of prominent families. Simultaneously, the revelation of the general's catastrophic gambling debts, propped up by his wife's fortune, would have annihilated his heroic reputation and likely prompted a court-martial for conduct unbecoming an officer. The banks that had facilitated these secrets, including the venerable Fifth Avenue National, would have faced a catastrophic crisis of confidence, with depositors rushing to withdraw their funds, fearing their own financial lives were no longer safe from exposure. The entire Gilded economy, which relied on the perception of stable, ancient wealth, would have trembled on its foundations. Perhaps the most profound casualty, however, would have been the collapse of a shared societal narrative. The Gilded Age was meticulously stage-managed. It was an era where the appearance of virtue, stability, and honor was a currency more valuable than gold. The public facade of charitable giving, pious family life, and unwavering patriotism was what held the social order together. The vault's secrets proved that this facade was, for many, a carefully constructed lie. The philanthropist was a briber. The war hero was a debt-ridden addict. The society matron was a traitor. The noble duke was a forger. If these truths had emerged in their time, the public's belief in its leaders and its institutions would have disintegrated. The social contract between the elite and everyone else, already strained by vast economic inequality, would have been torn to shreds. The backlash could have accelerated political revolutions, spurred radical economic reforms, and forever altered the public's tolerance for the pageantry of power. The vault, therefore, didn't just contain secrets. It contained the gunpowder for a revolution that was, through a combination of ruthless discretion and sheer luck, never ignited. Its discovery a century later allows us to look back and understand not just the hidden lives of the elite, but the precarious fragility of the glittering world they fought so desperately to preserve. Now we arrive at the most human and immediate consequence of this discovery, a dilemma not for the long dead, but for the living. Imagine being a descendant, perhaps carrying a proud and storied family name, when you receive a phone call. A vault has been opened, and documents have surfaced that directly concern your lineage. Your entire understanding of your heritage, the stories passed down through generations, the very foundation of your identity, is suddenly thrown into question. Do you open the file? This is the profound ethical crossroads where modern heirs find themselves, caught between the duty to historical truth and the powerful, often paralyzing, weight of a legacy they never asked to confront. For some descendants, the discovery is a key that finally unlocks a lifelong mystery. Consider the grandson of the French family whose painting was looted during the war. For him, the vault's documents are not a threat, but a form of long-awaited justice. They provide the irrefutable evidence needed to reclaim a piece of his family's soul, a tangible connection to a past that was violently severed. His choice is clear. To reveal the truth is an act of reclamation and healing. Similarly, the potential heir to a title who always felt like an outsider, sensing some unspoken secret in the family's past, might find in the vault the validation of a hidden paternity or a disinherited branch. For them, the truth is liberating, a correction of a historical wrong that restores their sense of belonging and rightful place in the family narrative. Yet for others, the revelation is a potential wrecking ball aimed at the very pillars of their existence. Imagine the distinguished family whose name is synonymous with philanthropy and public service, built on the fortune of a celebrated industrialist. The vault's records then reveal that their foundational wealth was amplified through a secret, monstrous bribe that indirectly funded a war. To make that public would not only shatter their social standing, but could also open them up to modern legal challenges, reparations claims, and the complete erosion of a carefully cultivated legacy. The choice becomes a torturous calculation. Do they uphold a modern moral standard and invite chaos? Or do they protect the living family from the sins of a long-dead ancestor, allowing a beneficial lie to continue for the sake of peace and stability? The emotional turmoil is often compounded by the very real practical consequences. Revealing a secret heir could instantly dissolve a fortune, dividing an inheritance among previously unknown claimants, and creating bitter public legal battles between cousins who once considered themselves family. Exposing a forged will from a century ago could invalidate current property titles and business holdings, creating a financial and legal maelstrom that could consume the entire family for years. The heir holding the secret then bears the immense responsibility of being the agent of either unity or destruction. Their decision is not made in a vacuum. It ripples out to affect elderly relatives, young children, and countless employees whose livelihoods are tied to the family's continued stability, turning a personal ethical choice into a matter of collective welfare. This dilemma forces a re-examination of the banker's oath itself. The original vow was one of unwavering secrecy to the client, a promise made in a different era with different social codes. But does that oath extend in perpetuity, binding the descendants and the institution itself forever? Or does there come a point where the ethical imperative to correct a historical wrong, to restore a stolen inheritance, or to simply let the truth be known, outweighs a century-old promise? Modern heirs must grapple with this philosophical question, weighing the intentions of their ancestors who clearly wanted these secrets buried against the moral landscape of the 21st century, which often demands transparency and accountability, even for past actions. There is no single, easy answer, and the paths chosen are as varied as the families themselves. Some heirs, after much soul-searching, choose to quietly re-lock the vault, metaphorically speaking. They may share the information only with immediate, trusted family members, deciding collectively that the potential for harm outweighs the abstract value of truth. They become the new guardians of the old secret, inheriting the burden of silence and ensuring the carefully constructed family narrative remains intact for another generation. In doing so, they make a conscious choice to honor the past's desire for privacy over the present's demand for disclosure. Others choose a middle path, using the information for private reconciliation without public spectacle. They might track down the descendants of a secret heir or the family of the blackmailed senator and arrange a private, financial settlement, righting the historical wrong without ever filing a lawsuit or issuing a press release. This allows for a form of justice and closure while avoiding the sensationalism and reputational damage of a public airing. It is a pragmatic, if imperfect, solution that acknowledges the sin of the past while attempting to mitigate its ongoing impact in a controlled, dignified manner. And then there are those who feel a duty not just to their family, but to history itself. They choose full disclosure, believing that the truth, no matter how painful, has a value that transcends their personal legacy. They work with historians, return stolen art to its rightful owners, and openly revise the family's biography, accepting the scandal and the scrutiny as the necessary price for integrity. In this act, they fundamentally transform the family story from one of gilded deception to one of courageous honesty, building a new, more authentic legacy on the rubble of the old. Their choice is a declaration that a legacy built on truth, however flawed, is stronger and more honorable than one built on a beautiful, enduring lie. The meticulous work of authenticating these explosive documents begins not with sweeping historical theories, but with a microscopic examination of the paper itself. Before a single word is deciphered, forensic historians and paper conservators subject each page to a battery of non-invasive tests. They analyze the paper's pulp composition, identifying the specific wood fibers and rag content that can pinpoint the paper mill in the decade of its production. The chemical makeup of the inks is scrutinized under various light spectra. An aniline-based ink, for instance, would have been commercially available only after a certain date, instantly exposing a document that claims to be from an earlier period as a forgery. Even the rust particles embedded in the folds of a letter, analyzed against known samples from a specific type of 19th century steel nib pen, can corroborate a document's age and origin. This physical authentication is the foundational layer, ensuring that the stage is set with genuine artifacts before the real drama of interpretation can begin. Once the materials are verified as period authentic, the focus shifts to the human hand that held the pen. Forensic handwriting analysis, a discipline that blends art and science, becomes paramount. Experts don't just look for a general resemblance to a known sample. They hunt for the subconscious, unrepeatable quirks of an individual's motor skills. They examine the specific angle of the pen against the paper, the unique pressure patterns in the downstrokes and upstrokes, and the rhythm of the writing, the almost musical flow that is as distinctive as a voice. In the case of the disputed Huntington will, it was this granular analysis that proved decisive. The forger had successfully replicated the shape of Augustus Huntington's signature, but the expert's report noted a critical lack of kinetic fluency. The genuine signatures flowed with the confident, rapid pace of a man signing his name for the 1,000th time. The forged version, however, showed tiny, telltale hesitations, microscopic pauses at the apex of letters, and a slight tremor in the curves, betraying the slow, deliberate, and unnatural act of tracing a model. This wasn't a signature, it was a drawing of one, a performance that collapsed under the magnifying glass. But the secrets weren't only in the script. They were hidden in the very structure of the financial records. Modern experts employ a technique known as digital ledger reconstruction. They painstakingly transcribe every entry from the crumbling, calfskin-bound ledgers into sophisticated databases, transforming columns of faded ink into searchable, relational data. This allows them to see patterns that were invisible to the original bookkeepers. They can run algorithms to trace the flow of funds from a single numbered account through multiple shell corporations and trusts, creating a visual map of the financial labyrinth. A transaction that seemed isolated in one ledger, when cross-referenced with a dozen others, can reveal itself as part of a coordinated capital flight on the eve of a war. This digital archaeology can identify anomalous transactions, a massive, out-of-pattern withdrawal that coincides perfectly with a political bribe, or a series of small, regular payments to a pawnbroker in another city that tell the story of a countess quietly dismantling her own jewels. The database doesn't just store information, it actively connects the dots, building a narrative from a constellation of isolated financial events. Perhaps the most poignant form of detective work involves the reconstruction of burned, damaged, or intentionally obscured documents. Using multispectral imaging technology, Conservators can often recover text that is completely lost to the naked eye. A letter that appears to be a blank, aged piece of paper might have been chemically treated to erase its contents, but the original iron gall ink can leave a subtle, permanent alteration in the paper's cellulose structure. By photographing the page under specific wavelengths of infrared or ultraviolet light, these ghost images of the text can be resurrected, revealing a heartfelt plea or a damning instruction. In one remarkable case, a document that had been partially burned, likely in a hurried attempt to destroy it, had its charred edges digitally reassembled. The recovered fragments, when pieced together, formed the address of a private asylum, solving the century-old mystery of what happened to a noble family's inconveniently ill relative. This technological resurrection gives a voice to secrets that were meant to be permanently silenced, pulling whispers from the ashes. Finally, all these disparate threads, the paper analysis, the handwriting verification, the digital finance trails, and the recovered texts, are woven together by historians who act as narrative detectives. They take the forensic evidence and place it back into its full historical context, cross-referencing the vault's revelations with ship manifests, newspaper society pages, political diaries, and weather reports. The cryptic ledger entry for the Alpine matter gains explosive meaning when a historian finds a diplomatic cable from the same week discussing a secret negotiation over a railway concession through the Alps. The date on a series of pawn tickets becomes profoundly significant when matched with a society column noting that a certain countess was unexpectedly indisposed and missed a major ball, providing her with the perfect alibi to travel to a different city and liquidate her gems. This synthesizing work transforms cold forensics into a hot-blooded human story, proving that the most complete picture of the past emerges only when science and the humanities work in concert, reading between the lines to finally hear the whole truth. But the vault's secrets were not confined to ink and paper. Its silent darkness also preserved a collection of exquisite physical objects, each one a tangible, heartbreaking artifact of the lives lived above. These were not assets to be balanced in a ledger, but deeply personal treasures, left behind as silent witnesses to moments of love, ambition, and profound loss. Among the stacks of legal documents and financial records, the discovery team's lights glinted off something entirely unexpected: a forgotten diamond tiara, its stones dulled by a fine layer of dust, but still speaking of a vanished grandeur. It lay not in a velvet-lined box, but wrapped in a simple, yellowed linen cloth, as if its owner had needed to hide it in a hurry. This was no longer just an archive. It had become a time capsule of tangible history, holding the very objects that had been touched, worn, and used in the dramas the documents only describe. The tiara itself tells a story of a desperate escape. Research into its distinctive floral design, a pattern of woven platinum leaves and dewdrop diamonds, links it unmistakably to a specific Russian noble family that fled the revolution in 1917. The vault's ledgers confirm this, showing a massive, frantic withdrawal of funds by the family's agent in the weeks following the Tsar's abdication. But the tiara's presence here, separated from its owners, suggests a last, failed gambit. The most plausible explanation, pieced together by historians, is that it was used as collateral for an emergency loan intended to secure passage and safe haven for the entire family. The bankers, assessing its immense value, would have accepted it, locking it away while the funds were transferred. Yet, for reasons lost to time, perhaps a missed rendezvous, an arrest at a border, or simply the chaotic fog of war, the family never returned to reclaim it. The loan was never repaid, and the tiara became a permanent, glittering prisoner in the vault, a stunning symbol of a dynasty that vanished, leaving only its most beautiful possession behind as a ghostly placeholder. Then there was the small bundle of love letters, tied not with string, but with a length of faded blue silk ribbon, its color softened by the decades to the hue of a twilight sky. The paper of the letters was fragile, threatening to crumble at the edges, and the handwriting was an elegant, feminine script, flowing with emotion. These were not the coded, strategic messages of financial agents, but the raw, unguarded outpourings of a heart. They detailed a clandestine romance between a young American heiress and a junior diplomat from a powerful European family, a relationship forbidden by both their social circles. She wrote of stolen walks in Central Park, of secret signals using handkerchiefs, and of a plan to elope. The ribbon itself seems to have been a token from him, perhaps torn from the lining of his waistcoat, or a gift from an earlier, happier occasion. Its preservation, carefully tied and retied, speaks volumes of the value she placed on this connection, a small, soft artifact of a love that was otherwise forced to exist only in whispers and shadows. But the most symbolically powerful object found was a gentleman's signet ring, heavy and cold to the touch, carved from a single piece of bloodstone. Its face was engraved with a heraldic griffin, the crest of a minor German princely house. This was no mere piece of jewelry. It was an instrument of power, a portable seal of authority. Dipped in hot wax and pressed onto a document, this ring's unique impression authenticated a nobleman's word, making any contract or letter legally binding. And in the vault, its purpose became terrifyingly clear. It was found resting atop a file containing the annulment papers for the German prince's marriage to the American steel heiress. The prince's own personal seal had been used to certify the legal documents that dismantled his own happiness. The ring was the physical manifestation of his duty, the weight of his lineage and title, literally pressed into the wax that erased his wife from his official history. He had used the symbol of his ancient identity to destroy his modern, personal one, an act of such profound self-negation that the ring seems to radiate a cold, tragic energy even now. Beyond these three central artifacts, the vault held a haunting assortment of other personal effects, each a fragment of a larger, untold story. There was a single, pearl-encrusted evening glove, its partner missing, suggesting a hasty departure from a ball or a romantic token kept as a souvenir. A small gold locket contained a photograph of a beautiful, unidentified woman in a lock of pale hair, a memory sealed away from the world. A set of ivory-handled grooming brushes, monogrammed with the initials of a famously vain industrialist, hinted at the everyday vanity that persisted even amidst world-altering financial machinations. These objects collectively transform our understanding of the vault's purpose. It was not merely a bank storage unit. It was a sanctuary for secrets too painful or too dangerous to be kept at home, a hiding place for the emotional and physical evidence of lives lived on the razor's edge between public expectation and private desire. The bankers, in accepting these items, became curators of a hidden museum of human experience, guarding not just wealth, but the fragile, physical echoes of heartbreak, hope, and sacrifice. As we step back from the intimate world of tiaras and love letters locked in that vault, a much larger and more unsettling question begins to form. The culture of absolute discretion that defined Fifth Avenue National Bank was not an anomaly. It was the perfected expression of a system that allowed the powerful to live by a separate set of rules. And when we hold that system up against the world we live in today, the reflection is startlingly clear. The tools have changed, the geography has shifted, but the fundamental human impulse to hide, protect, and leverage wealth away from public scrutiny remains a driving force in global affairs. The Gilded Vault of the 19th century has simply been digitized, its steel door replaced by encrypted servers, and its numbered accounts transformed into complex offshore financial instruments. Consider the modern equivalent of that Fifth Avenue vault. It is not a physical room in a New York bank, but a server farm in a jurisdiction like Panama, the British Virgin Islands, or Switzerland, running the software for a firm like Mossack Fonseca. The leak of the Panama Papers in 2016 provided a shocking, panoramic view of this modern secrecy ecosystem. Just as the Gilded Age elite used Mr. Peregrine and numbered accounts, their modern counterparts use anonymously owned shell companies and foundations. The purpose is identical: to create layers of legal ownership that obscure the true human being ultimately controlling the assets. A politician in a country struggling with poverty can secretly own a multi-million-dollar London apartment through a chain of holding companies, just as a 19th century duke could secretly sell his family's art through a blind trust. The technology is faster, the scale is global, but the core mechanism of creating a ghost economy parallel to the official one is a direct inheritance from the ledgers of the Gilded Age. The justifications for this secrecy have also evolved in a fascinating parallel. In the 1890s, a banker would have spoken solemnly of a gentleman's honor and the need to protect a family from the vulgarity of public financial scrutiny. Today, the language has been updated for a corporate, globalized world. The modern wealth manager speaks of asset protection, liability shielding, and tax efficiency. These are sterile, technical terms that sanitize the same old practices. The fear that drove a Gilded Age nobleman, the dread of creditors, rival family members, or a scandal-hungry press, is the same fear that drives a modern billionaire or corrupt official. The vocabulary is more sophisticated, but the underlying anxieties about preserving power and privilege against external threats are timeless. In both eras, the financial architecture is presented not as a tool for evasion, but as a prudent, even responsible, form of risk management for those with a great deal to lose. Yet the impact of this hidden wealth has magnified exponentially. The Gilded Age industrialist who bribed a foreign minister could alter the fate of a single railway contract and influence a regional conflict. Today, the anonymous flows of capital documented in leaks like the Pandora Papers can destabilize entire national economies, distort housing markets in world capitals, and undermine the tax base of countries, crippling their ability to provide education, health care, and infrastructure for their citizens. The scale is no longer that of a single family's castle. It is now the stability of nations. When vast fortunes are shielded from any form of taxation or public accountability, the social contract phrase. The civic philanthropy of a Carnegie or a Rockefeller, however stained its origins, has in some cases been replaced by a system where wealth is not just hidden, but entirely disengaged from any sense of obligation to the societies that enabled its creation. This raises a profound and perhaps uncomfortable point of contrast. The Gilded Age, for all its hypocrisy, operated within a framework where reputation and social standing were paramount, and the banker's oath was a powerful, if private, moral code. The modern system of offshore finance, by contrast, is often deliberately amoral. It is a global marketplace of secrecy, where law firms and incorporation agents compete to provide the most opaque structures with the fewest questions asked. The personal relationship between a banker and a client, built on generations of trust, has been replaced by a transactional relationship with a registered agent who may never meet the true beneficial owner. This depersonalization of secrecy makes it more efficient, more scalable, and in many ways more dangerous, as it removes the last vestiges of social accountability that once acted as a faint brake on the most egregious abuses. So, has anything truly changed? The evidence suggests we are witnessing an evolution, not a revolution. The players have expanded from a small club of transatlantic aristocrats and industrialists to include oligarchs, multinational corporations, and a global professional elite. The mechanisms have become infinitely more complex, leveraging digital technology and international legal treaties. But the central conflict remains the same: the struggle between the public's right to transparency and the powerful's desire for privacy. The discovery of the physical vault gave us a definitive, frozen record of how this worked in one era. The periodic leaks of digital data, the Panama Papers, the Pandora Papers, are the modern equivalent, a real-time unveiling of the same enduring system. They prove that the Gilded Vault was never just a relic. It was a prototype. And its legacy is the hidden architecture of our own world, an architecture that continues to shape our politics, our economies, and the very idea of fairness in the 21st century, proving that the most valuable inheritance from the Gilded Age is not the money itself, but the meticulously designed system for keeping it forever in the shadows. And so, after more than a century of perfect silence, the steel door of that hidden vault has swung open, and the whispers of the Gilded Age have finally found their audience. What these meticulously preserved records reveal is far more than a collection of financial transactions and personal scandals. They are a sprawling, unvarnished testament to the universal drivers of human behavior that transcend time, class, and title. Love, in its most desperate and forbidden forms, compelled a prince to marry and a duke to hide his own son. Greed, cold and calculating, motivated an industrialist to bribe a nation and a countess to stage the theft of her own inheritance. Fear, the chilling dread of social ruin and financial collapse, forced the creation of fabricated heirs and labyrinthine financial trusts. And ambition, the relentless hunger for power and legacy, drove a society hostess to treason and a rejected heiress to become a master blackmailer. These are not the unique failings of a bygone elite. They are the fundamental, often contradictory, impulses that have guided human action for millennia, here playing out on a stage set with unimaginable wealth and gilded expectations. For generations, our understanding of this period was shaped by its magnificent public performance, the grand portraits, the sanitized memoirs, and the society page tributes that presented a world of effortless grace and unshakable virtue. The vault's contents force us to replace that polished marble bust with a living, breathing, and deeply flawed human face. History, when written only from public records, is a clean and orderly narrative, a story we tell ourselves about progress and propriety. But the truth, as these secrets demonstrate, is infinitely more complex, contradictory, and fascinating. It is in the messy, unscripted, and often painful choices made in private that we find the real engine of historical change. The annulled marriage of a prince didn't just break two hearts. It potentially altered a line of succession. The secret bribe from an industrialist didn't just enrich a corrupt minister. It redirected the flow of international capital and influenced the outcome of a war. The personal was, and always has been, profoundly political. By integrating these hidden narratives, we don't tarnish the past. We enrich it, replacing a simple fairy tale with a gripping human drama that is far more relatable and true. This journey into the vault's heart also raises a compelling question about the nature of legacy itself. The families who went to such extraordinary lengths to conceal these truths believed they were protecting their name for posterity, building an eternal monument to their honor. Yet, in a profound irony, their legacy has become inextricably linked to the very secrets they tried to bury. We do not remember the Huntington family solely for their textile empire, but for the forged will that nearly shattered it. The Duc de Valois is not just a name in a lineage chart, but the central figure in a story of dynastic desperation involving a tenement baby. Their efforts to control the narrative have, in the end, been completely overturned. The lies they built to ensure their immortality have instead become the most memorable part of their story, a stark lesson in how the hunger for a perfect legacy can often create a far more complicated and revealing one. This leads us to a final, deeply personal reflection. As you have been listening to these tales of secret heirs and hidden fortunes, perhaps your mind has turned inward to your own family history. Every family, whether its name is recorded in history books or simply in a cherished photo album, carries its own quiet vault of memories, half-truths, and unspoken stories. What letters are tucked away in an attic trunk, their contents never discussed? What old photographs show a face that no one can quite identify, or hint at a relationship that defies simple explanation? What small mysteries have been passed down as casual anecdotes? The great-grandfather who suddenly left for a new country, the aunt who was never spoken of, the sudden sale of a family property that might, if examined with a little curiosity, reveal a hidden layer of your own heritage. You don't need a title or a fortune to have a family secret. You only need the passage of time and the human tendency to protect, to hide, and sometimes to forget. The ultimate value of this discovery, then, is not just in rewriting the history of the Gilded Age, but in inviting all of us to look at our own past with a more curious and compassionate eye. The secrets of the Fifth Avenue National Bank vault show us that behind every public facade, no matter how grand, lies a private reality of struggle, passion, and imperfection. This is not a cause for judgment, but for a deeper understanding of the human condition. We are all, in our own ways, a complex amalgamation of the stories we tell the world and the truths we keep for ourselves. So the next time you look through an old family album or listen to a story from an elder, listen a little closer. Ask one more question, for you are not just hearing a tale, you are holding a key, a small and personal key to your own hidden vault, waiting for someone with the curiosity to finally turn the lock and let the light